Chapter 448. This was the weirdest sword stroke that Wuxia Xianxia had ever seen in his life. The 15th blade, Samsara, was the starting move. Everything turned to ashes. The strongest unique skill of the Qin clan. But this sword stroke had no charm, not even much essence. But the moment the sword stabbed forward, there was violent and unparalleled sword intent everywhere between heaven and earth. Under this sword stroke, Wuxia Xianxia, who was ranked on the divine list and claimed to have the best defense in the world, sadly found that he could not stop this sword stroke without charm. This was truly an unstoppable sharpness that could cut through anything. Wuxia Xianxia could not imagine how terrifying this sword stroke would be in its heyday. He had no time to think about it. The blade of sharpness was straight. It was too fast and too simple. The blade went straight into the night sky, bursting the space. In a trance, all the sword light disappeared completely. There was only a bright blade in front of Wuxia Xianxia. The blade without any light or shadow pierced Wuxia Xianxia's clothes. The next second, it was death. Wuxia Xianxia's eyes widened. In an instant, his hair stood on end, and a colorful halo exploded around him one after another. This was a power completely different from martial arts. It was the light of technology. In the dark world, the Wang family of Beihai's gene potion technology was unrivaled and at the world's first-class level. And the individual combat equipment of the Jianghu family of South America was also the most advanced in the dark world. Wuxia Xianxia was famous for his defense. In any case, he would carry no less than 10 pieces of defensive equipment. These pieces of equipment were inconspicuous. Maybe it was a ring, a bracelet, or a necklace. But at a critical moment, these pieces of equipment could become life-saving things after being triggered. Wuxia Xianxia's body was surrounded by layers of hazy halos. The halo of light did not spread outwards. Instead, it tightly wrapped around Wuxia Xianxia, looking like layers upon layers of protective shields. The sharpness went straight forward. Hundreds of elites of Xianyuan's sword troop around became more and more solemn. Countless flames and thunderbolts turned into sword intent, gathered toward Qin Shilai, and finally disappeared without a trace. However, the silent sword qi on the sharp sword had completely torn apart the sky. The sword qi soared into the sky and swept across the sky and earth. The shield around Wuxia Xianxia's body kept twisting and shaking. Colorful halos kept flying around him. Messy metal pieces kept exploding and flying out. The halos were broken layer by layer. The sharp sword qi became stronger and stronger. Vaguely, that blurry silhouette seemed to appear in front of Wuxia Xianxia again. That figure seemed to completely overlap with Qin Shilai, with unparalleled sharpness and majesty. The power of over 100 super elites continued to gather. Qin Shilai stabbed forward with all his strength. Under this sword, Qin Shilai could only think of the simplest ending. Wuxia Xianxia must die. Wuxia Xianxia's eyes gradually became filled with despair. The ending he thought of was exactly the same as Qin Shilai's. Kacha, just as the last layer of the shield was about to dissipate, a clear cracking sound suddenly rang out. Wuxia Xianxia was stunned. Qin Shilai's face suddenly changed. His arms began to tremble slightly. The power from all directions was still converging towards him. His sword intent had reached an unprecedented peak. What he reincarnated was the sword intent of his ancestors. However, even though this sword intent had no charm, it was equally overbearing. At this time, the famous sword cutting edge, which was famous in Eastern Europe, could no longer bear the weight. A crack clearly appeared on the blade of cutting edge. In an instant, nearly half of the sword energy in the sky suddenly dissipated. Wuxia Xianxia, who was ecstatic, suddenly roared. The moment the shield dissipated on his body, a strong light burst out from all over his body. The strong light filled the night sky and completely enveloped Qin Shilai. Qin Shilai's sword intent broke out completely. Hundreds of elites attacked at the same time. The raging fire and thunder that shook the sky burst out completely. At the same time, the strong light around Wuxia Xianxia also burst out. The strong light was extremely messy, flying everywhere in a trance. 30-meter mortal world dreamland of heaven. This was also a defensive move in the 30-meter mortal world. But its main function was to escape. The strong light obscured everyone's sight. Every flying light and shadow seemed to become Jiang Qiansong. The formation of hundreds of elites of Xianyuan swords suddenly became chaotic with the different targets of the attack. Jiang Qiansong, who had been waiting for this opportunity, ignored Black Ghost and turned away. The broken blade of cutting edge pierced into Jiang Qiansong's domain. The remaining sword energy rolled up wildly and spread wildly after breaking Jiang Qiansong's domain. But Jiang Qiansong had already rushed out of the encircled formation. At this moment, he was only 30 meters away from the sword intent. But it was as far away as the end of the world. Jiang Qiansong suddenly burst out laughing. He stopped in place for a moment and looked back, his eyes extremely resentful. Qin Shilai's face was gloomy. He was a perfect person and a perfect formation. But it was just because of a few flaws in the sword that this destined to be earth-shattering attack failed. Qin Shilai's face turned red. However, such an arrangement had only left some minor injuries on Jiang Qiansong. If Jiang Qiansong managed to escape, the so-called Dark Sword Master would truly lose all face. Boom! An extremely violent roar suddenly sounded in the distance. Before Jiang Qiansong had time to say anything, the entire remaining castle collapsed completely in an instant. The magnificent building standing on the mountainous area continued to collapse and shatter. The lights completely disappeared, and the bell tower and the castle collapsed in the night. Smoke and dust swept the night sky like a thick fog, and then disappeared in an instant. Or it should be said that it did not disappear. It was covered by darkness. A black tide of extreme darkness suddenly rushed out of the broken castle. The black tide smashed the entire castle with great fierceness, rushed up to the sky, blocked the moonlight, and surged. The black tide had already lost its power, but it still carried a kind of mysterious charm. The black tide rushed through Qin Shilai and the sword formation formed by the troops of Xianyuan sword. As if by instinct, Qin Shilai raised the sword edge again. The remaining charm and the remaining sword energy merged into one in an instant. It was natural and perfect. The black tide and the sword light completely dissipated. In the blurred vision, the illusory figure suddenly became extremely clear. He raised the sword and stabbed forward. Qin Shilai disappeared. The black tide also disappeared. There was only the sword that was stabbing forward in the whole world. It occupied his vision, his consciousness, and the whole world. Jiang Qiansong let out the most miserable scream in his life. After all, he walked out of the sword formation and got rid of the lock. So in the face of this sword, he did not hesitate at all and turned to run. The incomparably grand sword energy filled the sky and moved forward slowly. The whole mountain area trembled under this sword intent. The sword intent swept through the castle and the mountains, and the condensed hillside burst into smoke and dust in an instant. Streaks of dust were flying wildly in the whole mountain area, like a sandstorm suddenly rising in a world of ice and snow. As the storm passed, the smoke and dust filled the sky and raged on everything. Jiang Qiansong opened his domain and defended with all his might. He ran away desperately and did not even dare to look back. This was equivalent to the joint attack of 2 generations of chosen ones after hundreds of years. But obviously, neither of them was in a perfect state. The sword intent began to dissipate slowly. A woman's voice suddenly rang out in the midst of the blurry sandstorm. Damn it! With the voice, an incomparably terrifying force suddenly surged forward. The terrifying power created a whirlpool in the hazy sandstorm. The sword intent was getting fainter and fainter. The vortex of power trapped in the sandstorm suddenly flew out, forcibly squeezed back the vortex, which was getting smaller and smaller, and then exploded. Space and dust were flying all over the sky. A blurry space gradually returned to silence. Qin Shilai looked ahead with a gloomy face. Under the silent night sky, an incomparably enchanting and gorgeous figure stood there. She had blonde hair and was full of cold killing intent and fighting intent. But Jiang Qiansong had disappeared. Qin Shilai's face suddenly twisted for a moment, and then he finally recognized the woman in front of him. The corner of his mouth moved, and he was about to speak. The woman in front of him had already clenched her fists and said in a cold tone, "Qin Shilai, how dare you attack me? You let Jiang Qiansong go." Qin Shilai suppressed the anger in his heart, and his voice was solemn. "So what? I'm here tonight. Whoever I want to live can live, and whoever I want to die must die." The woman's voice was arrogant and cold. She stared at Qin Shilai and said, "Do you want to live or die? What about you?" A hoarse voice suddenly sounded. It was a little weak, but extremely calm. "Do you want to live or die?" The woman suddenly turned around. A young figure covered in blood slowly walked out of the ruins of the castle. His body was shaking slightly, but his eyes were as bright as stars, sharp and bright. The woman narrowed her eyes and looked at him. Suddenly, she laughed. "Li Tianlan?" Li Tianlan, who barely walked out of the castle, ignored him. He came to Qin Shilai and asked directly, "Who is this?" Li Tianlan, who barely walked out of the castle, ignored him. He came to Qin Shilai and asked directly, "Who is this?" "King Tong, Queen of Shadows, Grand Duke of England." Qin Shilai's voice was hesitant. There were 3 women on the world divine list. 2 of them could be said to be on their side. But only King Tong was not. But it was King Tong who came tonight. And it was King Tong in her heyday. Li Tianlan said, "Oh," and looked at King Tong. "You let Jiang Qiansong go? So what?" King Tong looked at Li Tianlan playfully and said, "I can do whatever I like." "What can you do?" She paused for a moment and suddenly laughed like a blooming flower. "I heard that you are with Yuetong. Haven't you heard her say that? I'm her stepmother, or godmother. Don't you call me auntie when you see me?" Li Tianlan looked at her calmly. After a long time, he said blandly, "Bring Jiang Qiansong back, and I won't make things difficult for you." "Are you talking to me?" King Tong tilted her head and chuckled. But her voice gradually turned cold. "Now, get out of Reki City and Eastern Europe, and I won't make things difficult for you." "How about that? Just you?" Li Tianlan seemed to smile. "Just because I am, kill." In King Tong's arrogant voice, Li Tianlan suddenly shouted. In an instant, falling stars turned into a big spear flowing with silver light in his hand. Li Tianlan took out a turquoise hairpin with his other hand. He inserted the hairpin directly into the body of the falling stars. The huge silver sniper rifle suddenly burst out a dangerous and illusory light. The incomparably bright light enveloped King Tong and locked her in an instant. Li Tianlan's palm was on the trigger. King Tong's body was stiff, and she did not dare to move. She recognized that the gun in Li Tianlan's hand was a murderous weapon modified by the legend of Qin. She also recognized that the turquoise hairpin was Blue Sky Underworld. Both guns might be charging. But this madman was now using a murderous weapon as a bullet. He was going to destroy Blue Sky Underworld to kill her. Li Tianlan held the body of falling stars tightly. The huge body of the spear moved forward and nailed King Tong's forehead directly. Li Tianlan took a step forward expressionlessly, looked at King Tong, and said calmly, "Kneel down." Chapter 449. Excluding the mountain shatterer that Tyrant used when the Polar Ground Alliance collapsed, tonight could be said to be the first time that a murderous weapon appeared on the battlefield of Eastern Europe. And there were 2 of them at the same time. Blue Sky Underworld. Falling stars. No one knew the characteristics of falling stars. But everyone knew that Blue Sky Underworld was still in the charging period. So Li Tianlan directly used Blue Sky Underworld as a bullet. The green hairpin disappeared in the huge silver gun. The hazy and mysterious silver light suddenly filled the sky and the earth. The silver falling stars began to tremble involuntarily. As long as Li Tianlan pulled the trigger, the youngest murderous weapon in the dark world would completely decompose blue sky underworld in an instant, and then burst out in absolutely fatal power. The silver light shone in the night sky and turned into beams of light drifting between heaven and earth. Li Tianlan's power was great. The cold muzzle of the gun was pressed against King Tong's forehead, and the great force made King Tong's body completely lean back. Her perspective was completely tilted. In addition to the murderous weapon on her forehead, there was only the night sky, which looked vaguely beautiful in the silver light all over the sky, in her sight. King Tong closed her eyes slightly and then opened them again. In an instant, the calmness in her golden eyes faded away, and they became extremely piercingly cold. Her leaning body straightened up little by little, and she stood in front of Li Tianlan with the murderous weapon on her forehead. Li Tianlan did not retreat. Under the two opposite forces, King Tong took a step back as a matter of course. But the silver muzzle was still fixed on her forehead. King Tong looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. Li Tianlan looked at her quietly. There was only an extremely pure emotion in his eyes. This kind of purity could be called calmness. It could also be interpreted as madness. You want me to get out of Wulan state? Li Tianlan's tone was indifferent. The silver light burst out of his hand in an almost turbulent manner, covering the sky. The two murderous weapons began to gradually combine. Since there were murderous weapons in the dark world, no one had ever put a murderous weapon as a bullet in another murderous weapon. A murderous weapon was enough to protect a country. This was enough to deter an invincible realm expert. No one would be so extravagant. But just because no one had done it before didn't mean it was impossible. Murderous weapons were originally pure energy metals. If two murderous weapons were to combine and detonate together, the power would be unprecedented, and the consequences of doing so would undoubtedly be extremely serious. After this spear, blue sky underworld was destined to disappear from the dark world. Falling stars would also be severely damaged, and the price to repair it would be extremely high. Such a huge price also represented the power of this spear. All murderous weapons would accumulate energy slowly over a long period of time. At this time, if Li Tianlan deliberately detonated blue sky underworld at the cost of the complete destruction of blue sky underworld, the power that erupted could even exceed that of the human emperor. Under such power, it was impossible for King Tong to escape. Li Tianlan held the silver spear with one hand and pointed at King Tong's forehead. His face gradually became a little ferocious. You want me to get out of Wulan state? Who do you think you are? You let Wuxia Xianxia go? Who do you think you are? King Tong's head kept shaking because of the spear. Her golden eyes became more and more demonic, and she stared at Li Tianlan. She was the queen of the Shadow Throne and had a supreme position in the entire European Union. The chaos in Eastern Europe was unanimously regarded by all the wealthy families in the Shadow Throne as the best opportunity for them to occupy Eastern Europe and annex the four families. King Tong was full of confidence on this trip. Eastern Europe and Western Europe. In the vast Europe, the entire dark world of Europe could be said to have been occupied by the Polar Ground Alliance and the Shadow Throne. The recent generations of leaders of the Polar Ground Alliance were not happy. This superpower jointly supported by the four families could be said to be the puppets of the four families. It was restrained by the four families above, countless wealthy families below, and the governments of Eastern Europe beside it. Therefore, the Polar Ground Alliance, which occupied Eastern Europe, was not free. The Shadow Throne was also not free. It was an institution very similar to the Polar Ground Alliance, but it was far more mature than the Polar Ground Alliance. The Shadow Throne was not a puppet in the hands of the super-wealthy families and governments. It had successfully found its own position, a very high position, in all classes in Western Europe, which was far more developed than Eastern Europe. But the Polar Ground Alliance was not a king. Prosperity often meant chaos. Western Europe, which was full of powerful countries, had always been at the center of the struggle in the Dark World. There were the Shadow Throne, the Vatican, the Dark Knights, and Knights Templars. All the superpowers in the world had their own bases in Western Europe. Everyone even thought that the secret headquarters of the Samsara Palace was also in Western Europe. Everyone wanted to be the only one who was strong. But no one had enough power. So every force was waiting for an opportunity. In the chaos in Eastern Europe, the Polar Ground Alliance collapsed, Tyrant disappeared, and the four families lost the solid barrier in front of them. In the eyes of all the superpowers in the world, the whole of Eastern Europe had become a place where storms and opportunities were brewing. In everyone's mind, Eastern Europe meant different interests and status. In the Shadow Throne's mind, they would absorb everything left after the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance and assimilate all of Eastern Europe in the shortest time with the most similar operation mode. At that time, their power in Europe could even suppress the Vatican. This was what all the wealthy families in the Shadow Throne were looking forward to. Their queen, King Tong, was not at the top of the world divine list. But behind her throne was the full support of several developed countries and ancient wealthy families in Western Europe. What made King Tong more confident was their allies. He had used the full power of the murderous weapon, Indefinite Grace, in exchange for an absolutely powerful ally. The Wang family of Beihai. The cooperation between the two could no longer be described as a simple alliance of the strong. Therefore, King Tong could not think of any reason for her failure. Perhaps the only thing she had not thought of was why the chaos in Eastern Europe had changed so quickly. The expected long stalemate did not occur. Jianghu State used their youngest and sharpest young marshal to restart the Snowdance Corps. The young marshal and the army shocked the entire Dark World on the first day they arrived in Eastern Europe. The 5 Eastern European countries, the Jianghu family of South America, and the Snowdance Corps were all involved in a chaotic battle in an instant. King Tong didn't even have time to prepare anything. But the foundation of the Shadow Throne was enough for her to kill her way to Wulan State alone. The current situation was chaotic. But King Tong was sure of one thing. No matter who won, the Jianghu family of South America or the Snowdance Corps, the winner would not be easy. If she was fast enough, she'd become a paragon. She'd be strong enough to clean up the mess. No one tried to stop her. Even the Shadow Throne's most powerful ally this time was included. Wulan State might not be a big deal. But the 5 nearby countries centered on Wulan State were extremely sensitive. Controlling this place was basically equivalent to taking over 1/3 of Eastern Europe. With such huge benefits, King Tong could not hesitate at all. She came quickly, and the current scene was within her expectations. The Jianghu family of South America failed. Qin Shilai was injured. Li Tianlan was seriously injured. Everything was in line with her expectations. But she did not expect that Li Tianlan had murderous weapons in his hands. And they were 2 murderous weapons. This meant that at this time, as long as Li Tianlan was ruthless enough, as long as he dared to destroy a murderous weapon, he didn't even need any combat capability. As long as he pulled the trigger, the Queen of the Shadow Throne would be turned into ashes in an instant. The feeling of death was so cold, with such a huge surprise and humiliation that King Tong's brain went blank again and again. Li Tianlan. King Tong gnashed her teeth, one word at a time. Her teeth were very white, and the corners of her mouth were red. Even if she was extremely angry, she still had a very enchanting beauty. I'll repeat it again. Li Tianlan's tone was indifferent. Kneel down, or I'll shoot you to death. His palm was steady, and his voice was even more determined. Since you let Jiang Qiansong go, you can die for him. Do you dare? King Tong suddenly laughed. The humiliation in her heart was suppressed to the deepest part of her heart in an instant. She smiled calmly, which made her look even more beautiful. Li Tianlan's eyes suddenly flashed with an extremely dangerous sharpness. I'm Yuedong's stepmother. People like you don't care, do they? In the heart of people like you, for your hegemony, you don't even care about Yuetong, do you? King Tong's tone was calm. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and didn't speak, but his eyes obviously became colder. Yuetong can't stop you. King Tong said calmly, but what about Yuedong's father? Li Tianlan's pupils suddenly contracted, and his hand holding the murderous weapon suddenly tightened. Tianzong will show up here soon. He will represent Beihai and even Zhongzhou state to discuss cooperation with Rothschild and the Shadow Throne. As for the content of the cooperation, Marshal Li is not qualified to know, but I can tell you that the content of our cooperation is how to use Wulan state to expand the influence of Zhongzhou state and the Shadow Throne in Eastern Europe. Thank you for your fighting and contribution in Wulan state, Marshal Li. I'm willing to apologize for my inappropriate words before. King Tong smiled like a flower. Her smile was light and soft without any mockery, but it was extremely cold in Li Tianlan's ears. I think Rothschild and Beihai will never forget what Marshal Li has done in Wulan state in the future. I'm sorry, and I'm very grateful. So, now, should I take this thing in your hand? Qin Shilai clearly heard every word of King Tong. His face gradually became serious. Wang Tianzong represented Zhongzhou state and Beihai to discuss with Rothschild how to use Wulan state. Li Tianlan was now the youngest highness in Zhongzhou state and had a high position and power. But in terms of weight, how could he compare with Wang Tianzong? At least Li Tianlan could represent the Snowdance Corps now. But in front of Wang Tianzong, in front of any invincible realm expert in Zhongzhou state, he could not represent Zhongzhou state. If Li Tianlan really withdrew from Wulan state under pressure, how should the relatives who were neighbors of the 5 Eastern European countries deal with themselves? Qin Shilai subconsciously glanced at Li Tianlan. He found that Li Tianlan was smiling. His smile was obviously undisguised, and even his body was trembling. But he did not put down the gun pointing at King Tong, and his arm holding the gun was still stable. An indescribable shock and anger rose in Li Tianlan's heart, rushed straight to his mind, and even occupied all his reason. When he was fighting for his life in Wulan state. When he was facing the whole international pressure in Wulan state. When he was fighting with the Jiang family of South America to the death in Wulan state. Zhongzhou state had been silent. Now the situation was gradually becoming clear. King Tong was coming. Wang Tianzong was also coming. He was going to discuss cooperation with King Tong in Wulan state on behalf of Zhongzhou state. Cooperation in Wulan state, which he and the Snowdance Corps had conquered. F***ck it. Why? Since Marshal Li isn't tired, then raise your gun. But later, His Majesty the Sword Emperor may discuss the handover with you. I should probably avoid it. You think I will leave, don't you? Li Tianlan suddenly interrupted King Tong. King Tong's face froze for a moment and she looked at Li Tianlan. Just because he is the Sword Emperor, just because he can represent Zhongzhou state better than me. Li Tianlan's tone was soft and strange. So as long as he says something, I will give you Rekvia, which I have conquered, and Wulan state, which I have conquered, right? I will get your thanks, and then get out of Wulan state with your thanks. Do you think so? You, King Tong frowned. Why? Li Tianlan was still smiling. This family, this city, this country, it was me and my army that fought for it. My army is still on the way. I can conquer Rekvia, and my army can conquer the entire Wulan state. What can you and Wang Tianzong conquer? Every drop of blood and every life of me and the Snowdance Corps is not for your thanks. Do you think that Wang Tianzong can take away Wulan state by saying that he represents Zhongzhou state? Do you really think I'm dead? I can tell you now that I'm standing here. This place belongs to the Snowdance Corps, not to the Wang family of Beihai, nor to the Shadow Throne. As long as I'm alive, who can or can't let me leave Wulan state? Because you, King Tong, are not qualified. Wang Tianzong is not qualified either. From now on, this is a city controlled by the Snowdance Corps. As the queen of a foreign force, why do you think I dare not kill you? Wang Tianzong? King Tong's face suddenly changed. She took a step back subconsciously and opened her mouth. You! Shut up! Li Tianlan sneered. The falling stars moved, and the cold muzzle, which was shining with silver light, retreated a little and directly stabbed into King Tong's mouth. The cold muzzle almost stabbed into King Tong's throat in an instant, blocking all her words. You can live a little longer. Li Tianlan said calmly, His Majesty the Sword Emperor is coming, right? I'll wait for him. King Tong's body trembled involuntarily. It was not until this moment that she was completely sure that the youngest marshal of Jianghu state was not only amazing in spirit. He was a complete lunatic. Li Tianlan held the gun and looked into the distance. A female voice came from afar. It was clear, soft, and smiling. Your Highness is completely right. The sacrifice of the Snowdance Corps can't be replaced by a few words from some people. On behalf of the Vatican, Angel is willing to fully support Your Highness and Jianghu state in gaining a foothold in Eastern Europe. The voice was far away and sounded a little ethereal. But before he finished speaking, another voice sounded. The voice was very close, and it sounded completely beside Li Tianlan. Whether Jianghu state can gain a foothold in Eastern Europe or not, when does it need the support of the Vatican? The clear and indifferent voice was neither fast nor slow, but it instantly covered the entire mountain top. Li Tianlan suddenly turned his head. Less than 10 meters away from him, the silent space fluctuated silently and almost imperceptibly for a moment. An ordinary figure slowly appeared beside Li Tianlan. He glanced at Li Tianlan and said quietly, "Do you think it's necessary?" Li Tianlan subconsciously tightened his body. And the group of people who had appeared on the mountainside in the distance also subconsciously paused. The atmosphere was still quiet. But the ruins of the entire castle suddenly became like facing a formidable enemy. Sword Emperor of Jianghu State. Wang Tianzong. Li Tianlan held the gun and remained motionless. After a long time, he nodded calmly. "Greetings, Your Majesty." His voice was flat, but he did not loosen his grip on the gun at all. The muzzle was still stuffed in King Tong's mouth. King Tong did not dare to speak. Wang Tianzong nodded and did not look at King Tong. He just looked down the mountain with Li Tianlan. After a pause, the people at the foot of the mountain finally came up. The leader was a woman in white with her face covered in a veil. She was graceful, dignified, and holy. She slowly came to Li Tianlan, but ignored Wang Tianzong. She just bowed slightly to Li Tianlan and said with a soft smile, "I'm Angel from the Vatican." "Greetings, Your Highness." "Why are you here, Holy Virgin?" Li Tianlan's tone was calm. "I just want to explain something to Your Highness." Because of Wang Tianzong's existence, Angel's words were simple and concise. She turned slightly, pointed to the gloomy chaos beside her, and said softly, "Your Highness, this is His Highness Chaos, the head knight of Knights Templars. I have learned in detail about the raid on the Samsara Palace by Knights Templars and the Jiang family of South America. I can swear by my faith that in this matter, the Knights Templars have never slaughtered the garrison of Jianghu state. All this has nothing to do with us. Of course, we have the sincerity to resolve this unpleasant misunderstanding, and we will express our apologies at the appropriate time." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Chaos. Chaos's face changed for a while. Under Angel's gaze, he finally took a slow step forward, bowed deeply to Li Tianlan, and said in a dry voice, "Please forgive me, Your Highness. Divine Emperor of 9 Heavens." Chapter 450. In front of His Majesty, Chaos asked Your Highness to forgive him. With just one action, the Vatican's position had been completely clearly expressed. This should have been a matter of a lot of persuasion. But Wang Tianzong came quickly. So on such an occasion, it became a matter of a few words. Li Tianlan was not a fool. Neither was Wang Tianzong. No one was a fool. So the people present instantly understood what the entire Vatican was trying to express. Wang Tianzong slowly narrowed his eyes, still looking calm. Li Tianlan was thoughtful. He looked at Chaos, who had almost bent to the ground in front of him, and remained calm. Jiang Qinyan. Black Devil. Chaos. 3 experts on the holy list. In one day, 2 of them lay dead in front of him, and 1 bowed his head in front of him. This action represented not only the position of the Vatican, but also Li Tianlan's future interests. In fact, just a bow from Chaos in front of him was enough to boost his prestige. Chaos was the chief knight of Knights Templars. And Knights Templars was the spokesman of the Vatican in the dark world. It was self-evident how noble Chaos's identity was. Li Tianlan didn't speak, just glanced at Angel slightly. Angel stood there quietly, the night breeze blowing. Looking at the white veil on her body, the saintess behind the white veil seemed to smile. Knights Templars and the Vatican can jointly issue a life statement, emphasizing our friendly relationship with the Snowdance Corps, Jianghu State, and Arctic Ocean Command. Knights Templars can apologize to Jianghu State. Your Highness, I can assure you on behalf of the Vatican that as long as you are still in Eastern Europe, the Vatican and Knights Templars will be your most reliable friends. Li Tianlan didn't care about friends. He didn't even care if the other party was reliable. Because everyone knew that it was nonsense. What he cared about was the huge impact that the Snowdance Corps and the Vatican would bring in a short period of time. Wulan State was extremely important to him. If he could control the 5 Eastern European countries around Wulan State, he would almost control nearly 1/3 of the power in Eastern Europe. Such an achievement meant too many things in Jianghu State. Eastern Europe was huge. So when Eastern Europe was in chaos, everyone wanted a piece of the pie. But there were not many madmen who had to take down all of Eastern Europe. With the 5 Eastern European countries near Wulan State, Li Tianlan was equivalent to controlling a bridge from Eastern Europe to Western Europe. To this extent, Jianghu State could be said to be one of the winners of the chaos in Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan would be much more relaxed next. He could attack and defend at will. With such an advantage, he would never retreat just because of Wang Tianzong's so-called gratitude. But not retreating required strength. The Baiyu country's Qin clan was considered a force. If they could form an alliance with the Vatican, it would also be a form of strength. This could be said to be the sincerity of the Vatican. However, no sincerity could be given unconditionally. Li Tianlan admitted that he, a young man who had not entered the invincible realm, could not afford a bow from the chief knight of Knights Templars. If the church gave a lot, they would definitely take a lot as well. But that was not the most important thing. What mattered was that he had something to talk about with the Vatican. Qin Shilai pulled Li Tianlan's sleeve quietly. Wang Tianzong was here. King Tong was here. Angel is here. They were all familiar faces. Qin Shilai felt really embarrassed standing here. Li Tianlan nodded slightly, looked at Chaos, and said calmly, Knights Templars and the Jiang family of South America jointly raided the garrison base of Jianghu State. Forgiveness? How can I forgive him? He was now the marshal of Jianghu State. So he could not mention the Samsara Palace on the surface. Chaos bent over, did not get up, and did not respond. The deputy commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps who came with me has gone to track down Jiang Qiansong. If there is a chance, the deputy commander of Mellad will kill Jiang Qiansong. This is the sincerity of the Vatican and Knights Templars. Angel said calmly and elegantly. Li Tianlan smiled and was silent for a long time. Chaos still maintained the bowing posture that was a little humiliating for him, as if he had become a statue. Get up. After a long time, Li Tianlan said slowly. During the whole process, he did not look at Wang Tianzong, nor did he ask for the opinion of the Sword Emperor of Jianghu State. Thank you for your forgiveness, Your Highness. Angel smiled softly. As the veil fluttered, she looked peerless. Wang Tianzong looked around, his eyes paused on King Tong, and then he suddenly laughed. Tianlan, when can you represent Jianghu State? Wang Tianzong asked softly. Li Tianlan glanced at him and said, if I remember correctly, His Majesty recommended me to lead the army to the north. At the end of the meeting, I could represent Jianghu State. Wang Tianzong nodded and said, you can indeed deal with some things on behalf of Jianghu State. But it doesn't mean that you can handle everything. The relationship between Jianghu State and the Vatican is related to national policy. It's not just a matter of Eastern Europe. How can it be decided by you? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Wang Tianzong. His voice was soft and gentle, and he said lightly, I will report this matter to the Hidden Dragon Sea and the Decision-Making Committee. I think they will agree with my way of dealing with it. You don't have to worry about it, Your Majesty. Wang Tianzong was silent for a moment. His eyes were as deep as the sea in an instant. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. An undetectable pressure kept shrouding him. Li Tianlan's expression was calm, but the sweat on his back was getting more and more. It seeped into the wound and stung. After a long time, Wang Tianzong opened his mouth lightly. His voice was still unhurried, and it seemed to be the same as before. But Li Tianlan was keenly aware that there was something more in his tone. There was a little more factor that he couldn't capture at the moment. They may agree. Zhongzhou State may agree. Wang Tianzong said indifferently, but, he paused and said, I don't agree. In an instant, everyone's heart sank. Wang Tianzong was the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State and was qualified to call himself I. But in the past many years, he rarely used this word. Only a few people knew that every time he used this word, his emotions had surged to a certain extent. Or anger, or emotion, or self-mockery, or something else. But when this word came out of his mouth, it only represented one emotion. That was determination. Li Tianlan finally realized what the subtle thing in Wang Tianzong's tone that he couldn't capture was. That was majesty. The real, superior, and irresistible majesty. This feeling was very faint, but when it surged, it was like a completely surging and roaring deep sea, with a kind of power to destroy everything. Wang Tianzong's eyes fell on chaos. Chaos had stood up. But in an instant, he couldn't look directly at Wang Tianzong's eyes. It was calm all around, the night was deep, the moonlight was cold, and the stars were lonely. Chaos's body began to tremble for no reason. He was the knight with the strongest faith in the Vatican. That was why he became the chief knight of Knights Templars. He was an invincible realm expert at the top of the holy list. That was why he became the spokesman of the Vatican in the dark world. But at this moment, the boundless coldness suddenly fell on him as Wang Tianzong's eyes fell on him. He didn't know what happened. But he instinctively felt fear. Fear became his only emotion. It's a fact that we joined hands with the Jianghu family of South America to attack the garrison of Zhongzhou State. Facts can't be changed by any statement, nor can sincerity make up for it. Wang Tianzong said lightly, a sin is a sin. Zhongzhou State can forgive it. Marshal Li can forgive it. But, I won't forgive it. The moonlight all over the sky seemed to dim for a moment. The light converged to the sky. But the cold moon in the sky was getting brighter. Light and darkness seemed to alternate for a moment. A breeze blew in front of Wang Tianzong. The breeze came from afar and fell from a high place. It blew over the dust of the ruins, the dry grass, the night sky, and chaos. It was silent. Chaos's body suddenly stiffened in place. He stared at Wang Tianzong. There was only fear left in his eyes. Wang Tianzong's eyes were calm and indifferent. The wind was a little stronger, with a chill that could penetrate into the bone marrow. In everyone's sight, Chaos's body began to disintegrate silently. Clothes, weapons, armor, flesh, internal organs, and bones. They all collapsed into ashes. The dust in the sky was blown away by the wind. Chaos disappeared. There was no blood in the field, no sword intent fluctuation, and even the hay under Chaos's feet was intact. It was as if he had never been here before. He turned into dust and disappeared from the world without a trace. Qin Shilai's face changed dramatically. Angel's body was completely stiff, and she opened her mouth subconsciously. You, puff. A mouthful of blood flowed out of her mouth as she spoke, dyeing the white gauze red. Several saint warriors who followed her took a step forward in rage. There seemed to be nothing in the air. However, the bodies of several warriors seemed to have collided with countless swords and knives. Their flesh and blood were scattered all over the sky. Before they fell to the ground, they had been blown into ashes by the breeze. Are you familiar with it? Wang Tianzong suddenly glanced at Qin Shilai and asked. Qin Shilai's eyes were bitter, but he could not speak. The sword intent that filled heaven and earth silently enveloped the entire mountain area. Qin Shilai could not speak now, or even blink. In this state, as long as he opened his mouth, he would be seriously injured by the sword intent. If he moved rashly, he would end up like the warriors just now. All things turned to ashes. This was almost close to the peak state of all things turned to ashes. Only Li Tianlan could not feel the sword intent around him. Wang Tianzong's sword intent completely bypassed Li Tianlan and did not bring him the slightest threat. It was not because he was powerful. It was because he was the marshal of the Snowdance Corps of Jianghu State. Li Tianlan held falling stars in his palm, and the muzzle that was directly inserted into King Tong's mouth kept moving forward. He looked at Wang Tianzong with indifference in his eyes. Put down the gun. Wang Tianzong said slowly, we'll discuss the matter of Wulan State later. But I want to take King Tong away. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, suppressed the restlessness in his heart, and said calmly, why? Jianghu State and Rothschild have always had a lot of cooperation. Cooperating with Rothschild to occupy Wulan State is the best result for Jianghu State, unless you want to be like what happened more than 20 years ago, when all the Western European countries joined hands, and the Li family at its peak had to compromise. Do you think you can go against the natural order? Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan and said in a concise tone, let her go. Why? Li Tianlan's tone was so calm that it was almost numb. There was no fluctuation in his voice, although his heart was surging to the extreme. Jianghu State has cooperation with Rothschild. But it doesn't mean that Rothschild and the Shadow Throne can threaten the marshal of Jianghu State. Li Tianlan suddenly laughed. His eyes were shining, and the light was flowing, full of determination. I'll borrow a word from your majesty just now. Now that King Tong is in my hands, I don't want to let her go, so even if the whole Jianghu State agrees that you can take her away. But I don't agree. His hand that was holding the gun became extremely stable in an instant. As King Tong's eyes suddenly widened, he gently pressed his finger down and pulled the trigger in an instant. The trigger fell a little. But there was no gunshot. All the power was concentrated on Li Tianlan's finger. But the trigger that fell a little couldn't be pulled no matter what. The silver light all over the sky was flashing and rioting, but the silent sword intent completely isolated the silver light. The silver light was shining, but it couldn't be concentrated. The all-encompassing sword intent almost froze all Li Tianlan's movements in an instant. Wang Tianzong slowly moved forward and held the muzzle of falling stars. He pulled the muzzle out of King Tong's mouth little by little. Li Tianlan didn't move. He couldn't even move a finger. Wang Tianzong touched King Tong's hair and took her hand. He looked at Li Tianlan and said calmly, you have the right and qualification to disagree. But I'm here, and I forbid you to shoot. How can you shoot? Chapter 451. Li Tianlan couldn't answer Wang Tianzong's question. The indistinct but extremely heavy and majestic sword intent confined him where he was. Li Tianlan couldn't move or speak. He stood in a stiff posture holding the gun. The only thing that could move was his eyes. A pair of eyes as calm as water. Wang Tianzong saw thinking in this pair of eyes. In this state, Li Tianlan was like a statue. The surrounding wind blew slowly. The surrounding air suddenly became extremely thick. The curtain of night seemed to be glowing. It was faintly discernible and intermittently visible. It was a very obscure glimmer, but it carried a kind of radiance that was enough to illuminate the cold moon. Only the sun could illuminate the cold moon. Wang Tianzong was the sun. The only sun in this era shone brightly. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the thick and obscure space around him. He suddenly felt a little ridiculous. Jiang Qiansong claimed to be the best in defense in the dark world. This fact might be true before Wang Tianzong broke through. But in the headquarters of Samsara Palace, Wang Tianzong almost lifted the whole deep sea alone. The sword intent of tens of thousands of meters crossed the sky and destroyed everything. In this state, Wang Tianzong had vaguely broken through the peak of the invincible realm and was only half a step away from the real chosen one. In this state, Wang Tianzong was really close to perfection. His path was not only light, but darkness as well. Day and night alternated. Defense and offense were both multiplied explosively. This was the current Wang Tianzong. It could be done without batting an eyelid, or it could be earth-shattering. Li Tianlan could not even tell whether the space that suppressed and confined him was sword intent or domain. In terms of the martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai, there was not much difference between sword intent and domain when they reached the extreme, because the core essence of their martial arts was outbreak. This space, which was like a sword intent or a domain, firmly suppressed him. Li Tianlan's eyes moved and he looked at Wang Tianzong coldly. He could roughly understand Wang Tianzong's state at this time, but he could not break Wang Tianzong's current sword intent. The realm gap between them was too big. As Wang Tianzong said, Li Tianlan could not do anything if he did not allow him to do it. Under such a gap, Li Tianlan was not even qualified to fight desperately. The sword intent surrounded him. Li Tianlan's figure was stiff and he could not even move. How could he fight desperately? Wang Tianzong glanced at Li Tianlan and suddenly said, "Apologize." King Tong, who had struggled back from the edge of death, was uneasy. She glanced at Li Tianlan and thought to herself, this lunatic can't move or speak. How can he apologize? She wanted to remind Wang Tianzong, but as soon as she raised her head, she found that Wang Tianzong's eyes fell on her. King Tong suddenly understood, and her hand, which was held by Wang Tianzong, suddenly tightened. Wang Tianzong didn't mean that Li Tianlan should apologize to her. Instead, he wanted her to apologize to Li Tianlan. King Tong suddenly felt extremely angry. This kind of anger combined with the fear just now made her look very complicated. At that moment, King Tong was sure that if it weren't for Wang Tianzong, she would have been killed by Li Tianlan's spear. The feeling of brushing past death made her sweat all over, and her heart was still pounding. In a state of shock, Wang Tianzong asked her to apologize to Li Tianlan. She looked at Wang Tianzong in a daze. She looked at the man she had loved for many, many years. Wang Tianzong's expression was calm, and peaceful. King Tong suddenly smiled self-deprecatingly. Tonight, it could be said that she was humiliating herself. She came here as a dominator, let Jiang Qinsong go, and angered Li Tianlan. Wang Tianzong saved her. But there had to be an explanation for this matter. Li Tianlan was no longer the young man a few years ago or even a few days ago. Now Li Tianlan was His Highness and the youngest marshal in the special warfare system of Jianghu state. Wang Tianzong could save her life by virtue of the cooperation between Beihai, Jianghu state, and Rothschild. But she had to show her attitude. Apologize. Wang Tianzong repeated it again. King Tong bit her lip, and her face was a little pale. She should apologize for not suppressing Li Tianlan for what happened today. This was a normal thing. She knew that Wang Tianzong had considered a lot, but she didn't know what he had considered. After all, he didn't care. If he didn't care, how could he like her? King Tong took a slow step forward. She really didn't know what Wang Tianzong was thinking when he asked her to apologize. Was it the overall situation? Cooperation? Interests? Politics? Future prospects? From his standpoint, this was indeed a question he should consider. But King Tong still felt a little wronged. Because she knew very well that she was the one standing here today, so she needed to apologize to Li Tianlan. But if it was summer solstice standing here today, even if it was wrong, even if it was inappropriate, even if it was not for the overall situation, Wang Tianzong would not let summer solstice bow. King Tong walked up to Li Tianlan and bowed deeply. The moment she bent down, the whole sky seemed to dim completely. Her voice was a little hoarse and hollow. Please forgive me, Your Highness. The surrounding space became dimmer and dimmer. King Tong stared straight at the ground and at Li Tianlan's military boots. The sticky space slowly drifted away. Li Tianlan's calm and indifferent voice sounded. He looked at Wang Tianzong and said calmly, "This sword stroke is very powerful." Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows. Then, Li Tianlan's voice sounded again. "But it's not enough. For this era, this sword stroke is enough." Wang Tianzong said, "Nothing can break it, but it's indestructible." "How is it not enough?" "Nothing could break it. It was an absolute defense. It was indestructible. It was an ultimate attack." Li Tianlan laughed. "Nothing can break it?" He said calmly, "I want to have a try." Wang Tianzong subconsciously narrowed his eyes. It seemed to be the reappearance of chaos before its fall. Li Tianlan looked at King Tong and said calmly, "Forgive me? You let Jiang Qiansong go, and half of the painstaking efforts of the Snowdance Corps and the Qin clan have been destroyed. How can you forgive me?" In the increasingly subtle and dark space, Li Tianlan's voice seemed to be far away. I won't forgive you." Crack. The sound of space shattering rang out without warning. Li Tianlan, who could not move at all, directly raised his right hand. The whole world suddenly became extremely quiet. The world was quiet. In the absolute silence and nothingness, the mountains, rivers, and the world seemed to shrink in an instant, and everything in the world fell silent in an instant. Nothingness. Desolation. But it was extremely real. In the real world, an illusory sword light appeared. The sword light was ethereal and condensed. It was neither fast nor slow, but it could not be stopped. Because in the real world, speed had no meaning at all. Sword light. Sword energy. Sword intent. It kept falling down. Li Tianlan stretched out his hand and pointed at King Tong. In an instant, reality and illusion began to alternate. The world was a void. The sword energy that rose into the sky became the only eternal thing in an instant. The fiercest sword. The most real sword. The space was broken. The sword intent was broken. Wang Tianzong's sword intent was completely torn apart with the broken space, forming ripples one after another. Wang Tianzong frowned slightly. Countless viscous spaces suddenly enveloped King Tong. Li Tianlan's arm was like a sword, and he slowly pointed over. The space, which was thick enough to completely imprison an invincible realm expert, was shattered in an instant. Nothing could break it. This sentence was like a joke under Li Tianlan's sword. Wang Tianzong's eyes had become completely serious. He raised his hand and gently pulled it back. King Tong's figure retreated wildly under the huge force. Tens of meters, hundreds of meters, hundreds of meters. Li Tianlan's fingers stretched out. The sword intent that shattered everything spread wildly, and in an instant, it had expanded to a kilometer away. Wherever the sword light passed, the hard ground and the void were completely torn apart. Li Tianlan pointed casually, and it seemed that he had directly pointed out a terrifying void that was thousands of meters long. Wang Tianzong frowned, took a step forward, and directly stood in front of Li Tianlan. Day and night suddenly alternated for a moment. The peace on Wang Tianzong's body faded away, and the majestic and domineering dark sword light bloomed in his hand in an instant. The two sword lights suddenly met at the shortest distance. It was like the collision of two peerless famous swords. In the sound of gold and iron colliding, the two sword lights collapsed as soon as they touched. Puff! A mouthful of blood sprayed directly from Li Tianlan's mouth. The vibration of the joints was extremely clear. Li Tianlan could even clearly feel that there were cracks on the bones of his arms, which were almost completely broken. Dark red blood bloomed from Wang Tianzong's hands. His arms trembled uncontrollably, and he finally hid them behind him. Everyone looked at Li Tianlan with a shocked face. Qin Shilai was especially incredible. At the closest distance, Qin Shilai could completely confirm the power of Li Tianlan's sword just now. The absolute peak of the invincible realm. And it was the top peak of the invincible realm's sword intent. How could Li Tianlan become so strong? Wang Tianzong glanced at Li Tianlan, then looked past him and into the distance. He glanced over the ruins of the castle and cast his gaze into the dark mountain area in the distance. Wang Tianzong was silent for a long time before he slowly said, "How dare you borrow this sword strike?" Li Tianlan tried hard to swallow the blood in his mouth. He said calmly, "My sword is here. There's nothing to hide." Wang Tianzong smiled and commented rudely, "Stupid." Li Tianlan sneered and said nothing. Of course, he had not reached the peak of the invincible realm. The sword strike just now, as Wang Tianzong said, was borrowed. His sword intent was flawless. But the sword energy was not that strong. So he used his sword intent to borrow an extremely powerful sword energy in the distance. In an instant, the sword energy and sword intent combined, and the power directly soared to the peak of the invincible realm. And at the price of this, Li Tianlan exposed a part of his martial arts to the other party. It was hard to say whether such a price was big or small. But there was another problem. If he wanted to make this sword strike almost compete with Wang Tianzong at the moment of borrowing the sword, such sword energy must be similar to Li Tianlan's own martial arts in some aspects. It could even be of the same origin. In the whole dark world, there were only 2 people who were qualified to lend sword energy to Li Tianlan except Wang Tianzong. Lin Fengting was not here. Then there was only one person who appeared here. Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Deity. It could only be deity. Wang Tianzong looked at the darkness in the distant mountains and was silent for a long time. Chapter 452. Li Tianlan was also silent for a long time. Everything in Wulan State was coming to an end as planned, but the closer it was to the end, the more lively the scene became. After tonight, the Jianghu family of South America, which had no possibility of turning the tables, was destined to withdraw from the game in Eastern Europe. The Snowdance Corps forced the Jianghu family of South America to retreat, but the scene was more complicated. On the day of death, Jiang Qinyan, Black Ghost, and Chaos died. Li Tianlan was seriously injured. Jiang Qinsong was seriously injured. Qin Shilai was seriously injured. After the night, Li Tianlan had to face the covetous eyes of the Wang family of Beihai and Rothschild. It was the Vatican with a subtle attitude. It was the pressure that was finally transmitted to Eastern Europe after the internal game of Zhongzhou State. The 5 Eastern European countries had no choice but to surrender. It was the hostility of the whole of Europe. All of the various superpowers were paying close attention to this matter. They were all the variables that might be caused after the Purgatory of Heaven capital entered Wulan State. Li Tianlan's breath was a little heavy. These were all questions he had to consider. The man, the general, and the marshal all had their own standpoints. But as a paragon he had to adjust his stance to the bigger picture. Every paragon had to deal with a problem like Li Tianlan. The one who was able to deal with all these complications as if they were light was the true ruler, or rather, the ambitious and ruthless person. Li Tianlan turned his head and looked back. There was only darkness in the distance. But the darkness was incomparably sharp and dense. Sword chi that was as majestic as the sky filled the darkness in the distance, like lightning hidden in the 9 heavens. It was hidden, but the entire horizon was filled with a sharpness that could tear everything apart. All Li Tianlan could see was the dark sword energy. The sword energy of the 24 moves of sword. The sword energy of the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan was the first to feel the sword energy. At first, this sword energy quietly converged in the sword intent around Li Tianlan, as small as a drop of water. It was not that Wang Tianzong could not find it. It was just that he didn't notice. That was why Li Tianlan borrowed deity's sword energy, combined it with his own sword intent, and went straight to the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan could feel the initiative of this sword intent. But he also could not forget deity's undisguised killing intent towards him when he was in Tiandu. So why did God take the initiative to lend the sword? What was his motive? He slowly turned around. Wang Tianzong also withdrew his gaze. God still did not appear. In the majestic dark sword intent that almost filled the sky, Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong's eyes met for a moment. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Tianzong thoughtfully. Wang Tianzong's eyes rested on Li Tianlan's hand, and he was also thoughtful. Li Tianlan held falling stars in his hand. There was also a primitive heaven underworld spring in the falling stars. Although the two guns were forced back by Wang Tianzong, they were still damaged to a certain extent. However, such damage was not a serious problem in the eyes of any superpower. Wang Tianzong's eyes became a little softer quietly. He smiled. There was no negative emotion in this smile. This feeling, are you and I enemies or friends? Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. Boundless emptiness and exhaustion eroded Li Tianlan's body and will. His body was still straight, and he said expressionlessly, the overall situation is the most important. Wang Tianzong nodded with a smile. He looked at Li Tianlan with appreciation in his eyes, but behind the appreciation, there was a touch of killing intent. Two completely different ringtones rang at the same time. Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong took out their mobile phones at the same time. Li Tianlan looked slightly surprised. He didn't know who was calling Wang Tianzong at this time, but the person who called his mobile phone at this time was a real big shot. Li Tianlan picked up the phone and said hello in a hoarse voice. You did a good job in Wulan State, and you made a name for yourself. It seems that Tianzong's recommendation of you at that time also had a positive effect. They were right about one thing. In the chaos, Jianghu State, as the strongest country, should have the spirit to match the strongest national strength. Comrade Tianlan, when you come back, I will celebrate for you. A gentle and smiling voice sounded from the other side of the phone. Li Tianlan's heart, which had always been tight, slowly relaxed. He was waiting for this call. Because Jianghu State had been silent on the international stage. Now this voice sounded in his ears. It would not be long before the voice of Jianghu State would be heard all over the world. This proved that the entire Jianghu State had a completely unified attitude. You flatter me, President. Li Tianlan's voice was soft and peaceful. On the other side of the phone, President Li Huaqing smiled and said intentionally or unintentionally, do you have some misunderstanding with Tianzong? There is no misunderstanding. Li Tianlan said indifferently, it's just that the Snowdance Corps has dyed Eastern Europe with blood, and the heroic souls of Jianghu State need a home. This is the elegy and glory of Jianghu State and the Snowdance Corps. Neither the Sword Emperor nor the so-called Queen can violate the will of the Snowdance Corps. His voice was indifferent and determined. This kind of words might be more effective in front of the entire Snowdance Corps. But after all, he was still changing, and what he was growing was not only martial arts. So there were some words that he still couldn't say in front of the Snowdance Corps. But in the face of Li Huaqing, Li Tianlan did not hesitate to show his attitude, leaving no room for retreat. Li Huaqing was silent for a while. Comrade Fang Qing is communicating with Tianzong. Tianlan, we know the grievances between Beihai and the Li family. But now you and Tianzong are the flags of Jianghu State in Eastern Europe. Everything is important, and you can't let others see you as a joke. Li Huaqing's tone was calm. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and said, you ask him. He knows what's going on. This, he naturally referred to Wang Tianzong. Li Huaqing said yes, a little confused. Li Tianlan did not explain, but said blandly, before dawn, the flag of the Snowdance Corps will fly in the center of the capital of Wulan State, and I will raise the flag myself. He hung up the phone casually. The meaning of this sentence was already very obvious. He would hang the flag of the Snowdance Corps in the center of the capital of Wulan State. Even in the face of the Sword Emperor and the Queen, he would not give in. Wang Tianzong also hung up the phone at the same time. He glanced at Li Tianlan, slowly turned around, and walked in the direction of Qingtong. I will stay in Wulan State recently. He said. Staying in Wulan State meant that he would not retreat. His voice was very soft. But with the sudden breeze, it spread throughout the night in an instant. Li Tianlan did not express any opinion on this, but said blandly, "You should thank me." Wang Tianzong did not look back, but said calmly, "It should be the people around you who should thank you." He passed by Angel, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, and glanced at her. "If the Vatican is dissatisfied, let the Pope come to me in person. Beihai, Eastern Europe, or the Holy Land, I will wait for him." There was no wind in the night in the distance. But Wang Tianzong's voice came clearly from the ruins in the distance. Deity stood on the top of a steep mountain in the mountains. He was covered in black clothes and held a huge scythe that was 3 meters long in his hand. He watched the scene quietly. The overwhelming sword intent covered the mountains. He stood there in an incomparably real way, and the surrounding mountains became illusory. He watched the fight between Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong at that moment. He saw the two of them pick up the phone. He saw Wang Tianzong turn around. He also heard Wang Tianzong's voice. Deity did not say a word, but the light in his eyes was full of indifference. Daybreak stood beside Deity and suddenly said, "He will stay in Wulan State recently." "That's what I said to you." Deity did not respond. He did not even look at Wang Tianzong. He just looked at Li Tianlan quietly. After a long time, he slowly opened his mouth and said blandly, "Good for nothing." Daybreak smiled and said, "I think he is very calm and rational. Rationality is useless." Deity shook his head. "Strictly speaking, this is not even a breath of resentment. He did not suffer a loss tonight. On the contrary, if he really did what you hoped, the next result would be unbearable for him and Jianghu State." Daybreak commented, "This is their overall situation." Deity did not speak. Daybreak also fell silent. Sometimes, sudden help wasn't kindness. At least Deity did not lend the sword just now out of kindness. Sometimes being stubborn and not giving in was not full of hostility. Wang Tianzong staying in Wulan State was not hostile. At that moment, Deity's sword energy and Li Tianlan's sword intent merged. In the instantaneous confrontation, only Deity could clearly feel that Li Tianlan deliberately interfered with Deity's sword energy with sword intent. Li Tianlan borrowed this sword strike. But he did not exert the full power of this sword strike. At that time, Wang Tianzong did not notice Deity's sword intent at all. So if Li Tianlan did not hold back, it was equivalent to a full sneak attack on Wang Tianzong by an expert at the peak of the invincible realm at a very close distance. King Tong would die without a whole body. Wang Tianzong would be seriously injured in an instant. And it would be a real serious injury. He might even die directly. The Marshal of Jianghu State made a sneak attack and killed the Sword Emperor of Jianghu State. If he joined forces with foreign forces, what was that? At that time, not to mention competing for the interests of Eastern Europe, there would be a great disturbance within Jianghu State. Jianghu State would withdraw from Eastern Europe in chaos. There were only two outcomes for Li Tianlan. Either he was killed by the seriously injured Wang Tianzong with a sword strike, or he would be exiled for life for treason. As for the Li family and the Dongqing clan, what greeted them could only be a huge disaster. In addition to seriously injuring or killing Wang Tianzong and becoming famous in the dark world, Li Tianlan had no benefits. It was Deity and the Purgatory of Heaven capital who benefited. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was very strong, and so was Deity. And he was in Eastern Europe now. Wang Tianzong was seriously injured. Li Tianlan died. Deity would not let go of Wang Tianzong. He would not let go of the two murderous weapons in Li Tianlan's hands. He would not give up Wulan State either. He killed his biggest opponent and got the two murderous weapons and the control of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. If Li Tianlan really ignored the overall situation with that sword strike just now, what was in front of the Purgatory of Heaven capital at this time was all interests. What a pity, Deity sighed, and his voice was a little emotional. He really didn't expect Li Tianlan to be so calm and rational. An opportunity to seriously injure Wang Tianzong was in front of him. He could take action, but he couldn't. Everything was for the overall situation. If he took action with that sword strike just now, have you ever thought about the Li family in Jianghu state, Your Highness? Daybreak suddenly asked. His question was extremely sharp. But there was no guilt in Deity's tone, only calmness. The Li family in Jianghu state should be destroyed. Deity looked at Li Tianlan's back and said calmly, the Li family has me. He should sacrifice for the Li family. Daybreak nodded and suddenly laughed. Maybe Li Tianlan thinks so too. Deity did not speak, but looked quietly at the ruins in the distance. Wang Tianzong, who was in the ruins, had walked far away and came to King Tong's side. He took King Tong's hand again and turned to look at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was also looking at him. The two looked at each other. It was an extremely strange but solemn picture. Deity looked at this picture and was speechless. Li Tianlan. Wang Tianzong. These two people basically represented the present and future of the dark world in Jianghu state. The present. The future. They were all shining. Like the scorching sun. Like the sun in the sky. Deity became more and more indifferent. He suddenly thought of the mysterious His Majesty. If the other party was also put in this picture in front of him, what role would that His Majesty play? Was it the present of Jianghu state? The future? Or once? Chapter 453. Deity was looking at Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong. Daybreak was looking at Deity and Li Tianlan. The cold wind at night in Eastern Europe finally returned to normal. Some faint lights gradually lit up in the desolate and dilapidated castle ruins. This picture was a little desolate and tragic. But it was beautiful. Deity. Li Tianlan. Wang Tianzong. The three of them stood in different positions, but they seemed to be connected in a line. Daybreak looked at this scene and suddenly had an indescribable strange feeling in his heart. This picture is very beautiful. Daybreak suddenly said. This sentence was very simple. But it was also very complicated. It contained many meanings. Deity glanced at him, slowly turned around, and calmly said, there was an old guy who once said something. His body moved forward. As he moved forward, he moved the huge 3-meter-long sickle beside him. The cold light of the sickle reflected the moonlight and became sharper. But as God's body moved, a drop of blood suddenly dripped down and landed on the sharp and clear scythe. The drop of blood was dark red, and it was a shocking sight. Through Li Tianlan's sword intent and Wang Tianzong's sword, Deity pursed his lips tightly. So the blood turned into a thin line of blood, flowed down the corner of Deity's mouth, and fell on the blade of the sickle. Deity's voice was calm and stubborn. Everything beautiful will be broken. Daybreak looked at the blood flowing down the blade, and his eyes were complicated and dignified. He didn't know who the old guy in Deity's mouth was. He also knew under what circumstances the Old Highness said this sentence. This was what the Old Highness said when he knew Deity's ambition for the Wang family of Beihai. It came from the bottom of his heart, but it was meaningful. Daybreak moved slowly with Deity and said calmly, Wang Tianzong is stronger than 3 years ago. Yes. Deity nodded. His tone was still calm, without any negative emotions. But this is his limit. For this era, a half-step chosen one is indeed invincible. But if he can't take the last step, what can he do no matter how strong he is? You're hurt. Daybreak said. What he said was a fact that could not be more obvious. In the final battle of Heaven Capital 3 years ago, Deity and Wang Tianzong were at the peak of the invincible realm at the same time. Wang Tianzong might be a little stronger, but it was almost negligible. But now was completely different from 3 years ago. Wang Tianzong had another breakthrough. In this state, Wang Tianzong was really half a step stronger than Deity. If you take action now and fight Wang Tianzong to the death, how confident are you? Daybreak asked. I'm not sure. Deity shook his head. He stopped where he was and thought silently for a while. Then he continued, in your opinion, what was the fundamental reason for the collapse of the Li family? This. The problem was huge. The answer was well known. But sometimes, the answer that everyone knew was not necessarily correct. Daybreak looked at Deity and waited for his explanation. It's not me who committed treason. God said, even if there is no case of treason, something else will happen. Maybe it will be something even more shocking. Maybe it will be some small things that add up and cause greater consequences. The root cause of the Li family's collapse was that the Li family was too strong and the old guy was too pedantic. Deity whispered, so everyone in the world wants the Li family to be destroyed. Summer solstice easily took advantage of people's hearts. She united with Kunlun City, the Jianghu family of South America, and several other superpowers. At that time, the Wang family of Beihai was very dangerous and could be crushed by the Li family at any time. But when summer solstice looked for other superpowers to cooperate with, no one would demand an exorbitant price from the Wang family of Beihai because of its situation. Even the Jianghu family of South America, which had always been hostile to the Wang family of Beihai, helped the Wang family of Beihai almost for free. Why? Because of the existence of the too strong Li family, no one wanted to see the Wang family of Beihai disappear. Even the hostile forces of the Wang family of Beihai didn't want to see this, because they knew very well that once the Li family annexed the Wang family of Beihai, they would not have a good end. Because the Li family was too strong, everyone in the world wanted to destroy it. Everyone in the world wanted to destroy the Li family. So the Li family was really destroyed. Daybreak vaguely seemed to know what Deity meant. So now I have no confidence in Wang Tianzong. I'm not his opponent. But so what? Wang Tianzong is very strong, but not the strongest. The half-step chosen one is invincible in the world, but he doesn't have absolute dominance. How similar is the Wang family of Beihai in this state to the Li family in the past? In the past, the Li family was too strong, so people in the world wanted to destroy the Li family. Now Wang Tianzong is too strong, so people in the world want to kill the Sword Emperor. People in the world want to kill him. What does it matter if I'm not sure? He continued to move forward and said calmly, go to see Qin Weibai. I have a hunch that no matter what the situation of the Samsara Palace is in this chaos in Eastern Europe, Qin Weibai will give everyone a surprise. Actually, Daybreak hesitated for a moment. With Qin Weibai's assistance, Tianlan's future achievements will be unimaginable. Your Highness, Deity said in a deep voice. Daybreak gritted his teeth and continued, so I think that Li Tianlan, with Qin Weibai by his side, is the greatest hope to support the Li family in the future. His voice calmed down. So I don't understand why you always want to kill him. You even want to kill Qin Weibai. Wiping out the future hope of the Li family, are you reviving the Li family or destroying it? You don't understand. Deity shook his head. The Li family with Li Tianlan is not what I want. When I returned to Zhongzhou State this time and faced the old guy in Lin'an, I just wanted to tell him one thing. Deity laughed. Under the black clothes that covered his face, his voice and expression were extremely paranoid. His voice and expression were extremely paranoid. The Li family is my Li family. It's also Li Tianlan's. Daybreak said calmly. He was Deity's real confidant and the person who knew him best, so he spoke casually and was not afraid that Deity would suddenly turn against him. No. Deity's tone was cold. That's just what you think, no. Daybreak sneered rudely and said, who doesn't think so except you? The Li family used to be yours, and now it's Li Tianlan's. The purgatory of heaven capital is yours now, and it will be Li Tianlan's in the future. Almost everyone regards him as the young master. Believe it or not, if you die in the chaos in Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan will take over the entire purgatory of heaven capital in the shortest time. This is the truth. What can you prove by saying no? Deity suddenly stopped. In the dark night, he slowly turned around, looked in the direction of Li Tianlan, and was silent for a long time. Wang Tianzong can't kill Li Tianlan, because Li Tianlan is the marshal of Zhongzhou State. He has scruples and restrictions. But you don't. Isn't the reason why you don't do it because you are hesitating? You are hesitating about the future of you and the Li family. You are not even sure about your future. How can you say that he is not? Deity gently raised his hand. This action interrupted Daybreak's words. Countless sword intents suddenly surged in his hands. The darkness of thousands of meters around shrank wildly. Deity's eyes were cold. In front of the ruins of the castle, Li Tianlan suddenly turned back and looked at the darkness in the distance. Deity kept his hand raised and looked at Li Tianlan, but he did not make a move. But the sword intent all over Li Tianlan suddenly burst out. The sword intent alternating between reality and illusion rose to the sky. A vast and sharp sword light rushed in the direction of Deity in an instant. The night was roaring crazily. Li Tianlan's sword intent burst out, and the whole night sky seemed to suddenly have a surging river across the sky. Li Tianlan's eyes were extremely deep. For the first time since he became the combat capability of the invincible realm, he felt so small. Qin Shilai was also shocked. At this moment, no one knew how many experts were hidden in the ruins of the castle. It was like a replay of the battle between Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong with the help of the sword. The sword energy and sword intent intertwined. In an instant, the sword that crossed the night sky was another attack of the peak of the invincible realm. But last time, Li Tianlan used his own sword intent to borrow Deity's sword energy. This time, when Deity was about to kill Li Tianlan, the sword energy suddenly surging in the night sky forcibly borrowed Li Tianlan's sword intent. At this moment, Li Tianlan was not the leader of this sword. Instead, he was completely protected by this huge and incredible sword energy. Li Tianlan knew this sword. Deity also knew this sword. At this time, the sword with the help of Li Tianlan's sword intent was one of the 24 moves of sword. 21st Blade Shatter of Land. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor. Chapter 454. Compared with the instantaneous confrontation between Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong. Under the curtain of night, the sword that suddenly rose after the end was really unexpected to everyone. No one knew how long this sword had been dormant in the dark. But at this moment, when it suddenly broke out, the sword energy was surging and mighty, and the sharp edge was simply earth-shattering. This was really unexpected. In this battlefield, this sword was simply the most perfect concealment. Because Li Tianlan was here. Because Deity was here. Because this sudden sword was the 24 moves of sword. Li Tianlan and Deity might have felt this trace of sword energy. Li Tianlan thought this was Deity's sword. And Deity also thought this was Li Tianlan's sword. Neither of them thought that there would be a third sword energy that belonged to the 24 moves of sword on this battlefield. So after Wang Tianzong left. When Deity almost made up his mind to attack Li Tianlan, this sword broke out without warning but hysterically. The sword light was straight and thick. It was like a startling rainbow in the night sky, and also like a surging river. The wild sword energy kept flying from all corners of the night. Li Tianlan's sword intent began to surge uncontrollably. In an instant, the sky and the earth were full of sword light. A crazy sword. A decisive sword. Every ray of flowing light was filled with determination. Deity still stretched out his hand. Before he made a move, this almost overwhelming sword had directly arrived in front of him. Deity's figure stood straight, looking mysterious and majestic. But his face under the black clothes looked a little stunned. Daybreak was right. He did not have any constraints, but it did not mean that he had no concerns. Now that he killed Li Tianlan, he also had to consider a lot of things. So when the sword light gathered in his palm, he also had hesitation in his heart. But he did not expect that this sword that was dormant in the dark was so decisive. When he was still hesitating, the other party had already made a move. The sword energy was surging, crazy and violent. This sword was like a warning, but also like the beginning of the final battle. The meaning was obvious: you can't kill Li Tianlan. You can't even have this kind of thought. So domineering. Deity suddenly raised his palm. The sword qi, which had been condensed to the extreme, blossomed in his palm, like a sharp and beautiful flower. Before anyone could react, the two sword intents collided. A chaotic buzzing sound rang out between heaven and earth. A chaotic and hazy light suddenly appeared on the mountain far away from the ruins. The curtain of night was no longer pure, and the light was no longer dazzling. A large area of space fluctuated like a turbulent sea, turning into ripples that spread out layer by layer. The ripples were silent, but wherever they passed, everything turned into flying dust. A cold moon suddenly rose in the space that was completely filled by the two sword lights. The cold moon was very small, but the moment it appeared, it truly replaced the starlight in the sky. Deity raised the huge sickle in his hand. The light on the scythe flowed, and the nearby space was subtly distorted. Eventually, it became the unique skill of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, which rarely appeared in the dark world. Galaxy Silver. The scythe turned into a cold moon and spun wildly. A large area of broken void collapsed inward in an instant, and the starlight all over the sky seemed to be constantly shaking down. There was only a very vague figure in Deity's eyes. He could not see the other party's face or figure. The other party was clearly in front of him, close at hand, but it seemed to be the whole world. Only the sword light was constantly surging in front of him. The spinning scythe whistled wildly in the void. Deity narrowed his eyes. In the face of this inexplicable and abrupt sword, his palms seemed to move, but also seemed to not move. But after being shattered by the two-sword chi, the void that had been trying to spread around suddenly stagnated. Heartless seal. Infinite seal. Holy punishment seal. There was a wild sound in an instant in the silent void. The whole void was completely distorted in an instant, turning into vortexes one after another. The vortexes converged into a storm. The entire storm was constantly twisting and spinning in the silent void, like a giant dragon rising in the night sky. It looked incomparably real. Deity's figure gradually disappeared. The spinning scythe also disappeared completely. The storm kept splitting. Hundreds of them danced densely under the night sky, almost making reality occupy the whole void. From a distance, there seemed to be gray beams of light swimming in the night sky one after another. Every beam of light was sword intent. The sword intent at the peak of the invincible realm. And the sword light that suddenly rose seemed to have disappeared in the sudden outbreak of the hurricane. But in the center of countless storms, there was still the sound of gold and iron colliding. The sound was harsh and almost resounded throughout the city. Li Tianlan looked at everything in his sight. For the first time, there was undisguised shock in his eyes. He was not shocked by Deity's absolute power. It was the sword that suddenly rose to protect him behind. This sword was the 24 moves of sword. There were many paths in the 24 moves of sword, but the sword intent that evolved to the extreme was reality and illusion. This was the path of the chosen one that all the top figures in the dark world knew. But everyone's reality and illusion were different. Deity's sword intent represented reality. Li Tianlan also had his own real sword intent. The two kinds of sword intent seemed to be similar, but the subtle difference represented different directions. And now, in the real storm that Deity could destroy everything, the nature of the break of land that suddenly rose was completely revealed. Deity's sword was real. As for the shatter of mountains and rivers, it was illusory. The most important thing was, this was Li Tianlan's own kendo. It was his own kendo. If he broke through the invincible realm, this sword move of his would probably be the same as this one. There would be no essential difference. This was definitely not what the other side could do with his sword intent. In other words, the sword that suddenly rose in the dark was Li Tianlan's kendo. From sword energy to sword intent, it was almost perfect. So the strength and realm of this sword move were not as good as Deity's. But in that terrible storm, the sword intent of nothingness always existed. Li Tianlan stared at the night sky in the distance. Whose sword was this? From the unique skill of the break of land, there were only a few candidates. It was impossible for Grandpa. He had fallen to the invincible realm. It was also impossible for Lin Fengting. His strength did not need to borrow sword intent. Deity was in front of him. In this way, there was only one candidate left. The master of Samsara Palace. But Li Tianlan could clearly judge the strength of this sword move. In terms of the sharpness of sword energy, this sword move was at most equivalent to the invincible realm who had stabilized his realm. There was still a long way to go from the peak of the invincible realm. So this sword move borrowed his sword intent, combined with sword energy, and finally raised the power to the level close to the peak of the invincible realm. If this sword move came from the master of Samsara Palace, didn't that mean that the master of Samsara Palace, who ranked 4th on the divine list, had just stabilized her realm of the invincible realm? How was this possible? Crack. A clear cracking sound suddenly sounded in the storm that suppressed the illusion. Countless terrifying storms disappeared completely in an instant. Deity's figure reappeared in the air with a sickle in his hand. A broken sword edge fell in front of him. The sword edge broke into countless pieces and fell down. Finally, it turned into ashes and scattered with the wind. Deity silently looked at the ashes of the broken sword edge. He didn't know this sword, but he was sure that it definitely belonged to the ranks of famous swords. But now the sword had been shattered. Where was the person? Playing tricks, Deity suddenly said. Deity suddenly said. His voice was clearly heard all over the place. Li Tianlan suddenly felt that this sentence was really ironic. Deity slowly turned around and looked at Li Tianlan. His eyes flickered. Finally, he walked toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan stood there stiffly, looking at Deity who was getting closer and closer. The distance between the two was getting closer and closer. Hundreds of meters. 100 meters. Dozens of meters. The sword intent on Deity rose again, sharp and ruthless. But what responded to Deity was another surge of sword energy that was even crazier than before. All the sword energy completely wrapped Li Tianlan. Every move conveyed a clear meaning to Deity. If you want to kill him, you can't do it unless I die. Deity snorted coldly. The sword energy that protected Li Tianlan was always silent. The silence was so warm. The one who helped you is the master of Samsara Palace. Deity suddenly said. This was the only candidate he could think of, but he was not sure. It was not until this moment that Deity suddenly remembered that he had never seen the master of Samsara Palace. He only saw Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai's will was the will of the master of Samsara Palace. This had become a consensus in the dark world. So the master of Samsara Palace was silent for a longer and longer time, so that Qin Weibai's existence was getting stronger and stronger. But no matter how small the master of Samsara Palace was, no one dared to look down on him. Deity was sure that in terms of the nature of the sword just now, there was still a long way to go before he reached the peak of the invincible realm. If the real level of the master of Samsara Palace was really like this, then she could not have defeated Gu Xingyun. But now he was the only candidate in Deity's heart. That was why he came over to test Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan looked at Deity quietly. His eyes were quiet and deep. In the long silence, he did not answer Deity's question, but asked softly, "Who are you?" Deity's eyes seemed to fluctuate, and even the sword intent on his body subconsciously restrained a little. "I am Deity," he said calmly. "You are related to the Li family," Li Tianlan said. Deity paused and remained silent. Silence itself was acquiescence. Li Tianlan laughed self-deprecatingly. "You are related to the Li family. Why do you want to kill me?" Deity was silent for a long time before he said calmly, "The Li family betrayed me. Zhongzhou state betrayed me." Li Tianlan fell silent. Deity suddenly seemed to lose interest. He thought of Li Tianlan's situation and suddenly smiled. The sword intent on his body had completely disappeared, and he became a little bleak. "I won't kill you for the time being, but in the chaos of Eastern Europe, from the inside to the outside, there are dangers everywhere around you. Li Tianlan, let me ask you, the chaos of Eastern Europe has come to an end. If Zhongzhou state betrays you, what will you do? This question hit the key point that everyone cared about. Everyone present looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was silent and looked into Deity's eyes. After a long time, he said calmly, Zhongzhou state did not betray me, and I did not betray Zhongzhou state. He still did not answer Deity's question. But his answer was enough to explain everything. The first sentence that he did not betray Zhongzhou state was that Zhongzhou state did not betray him. Deity laughed. I will watch Zhongzhou state. He said slowly, if the ending is not what you hope, I will have a drink with you before you die. He looked around and said loudly, Your Highness, Palace Master, why don't you come out and meet me? There was still silence in the wilderness. In the illusory sword intent, even Deity could not find where the other party was. Deity waited for a while, nodded silently, pointed to Li Tianlan, and then slowly turned around. In the ruins of ruin, in the silent night, lights began to appear at the foot of the mountain. The mountains were roaring and shaking. The smell of smoke and blood was carried by the night wind. It was incomparably tragic. The crazy and solemn killing intent roared from the foot of the mountain. One figure after another appeared at the foot of the mountain. Deity did not look back and moved forward silently. His footsteps were neither fast nor slow. He looked a little lonely, but he was not lonely. Li Tianlan looked at him for a long time, then slowly turned around and said calmly, Go down the mountain. There were very few people on the mountain. Li Tianlan. Qin Shilai. Angel, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. As well as several saint warriors. Li Tianlan moved forward slowly. When he passed by Angel, he suddenly glanced at her. His voice gradually became gentle, with a strong sense of modesty and apology. Your Highness, I'm sorry for what happened tonight. I'm also sorry for the death of Chaos, but the Snowdance Corps also has the sincerity of the Snowdance Corps, so please convey my apology to His Majesty the Pope, Your Highness. Angel looked at Li Tianlan. In her sight, it was a sincere face. But Angel smelled a faint trace of hypocrisy and coldness. The death of Chaos was definitely an accident. An invincible realm expert was a real big shot in the Vatican. The Vatican was willing to pay a lot to ease the relationship with Zhongzhou state, but the life of Chaos was definitely not the price the Vatican was willing to pay. But Angel couldn't say anything now. In the face of such a Li Tianlan. In the face of a marshal of Zhongzhou state who put Zhongzhou state not letting him down first. Angel wasn't sure what would happen to her if she turned against him. Even if she had a very subtle relationship with Situ Wanjia. Ambitious? Or treacherous? Angel looked at Li Tianlan. She was silent for a while, and then said softly, The sincerity of the Vatican will not change. Your Highness, I'm willing to go with you tonight. Li Tianlan's eyes lit up, and a smile flashed through the depths of his eyes. Angel saw the smile, but she felt cold all over. Go down the mountain. Li Tianlan turned around and said it again. The people going down the mountain went down the mountain. The people going up the mountain went up the mountain. The two sides finally met on the mountainside. In a strong, almost suffocating atmosphere of blood and fire, a figure covered in blood slowly walked to the front of a large number of people going up the mountain. He held a flag tightly in his hand and seemed to use all his strength. He said in a loud voice, Li Zhonghu, the commander of the Thunderbolt Division of the Snowdance Corps of Zhongzhou State, reporting. It was 8:05 in the evening of August 7th in Eastern Europe. It was the 15th hour since Li Tianlan arrived in Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan looked at Li Zhonghu, who was covered in blood in front of him, at the flag in his hand, and at the large number of people behind him. The corners of his mouth twitched fiercely, and his eyes became extremely cruel in an instant. There was indeed a large group of people in front of him. The 5,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Division marched into Wulan State in 2 batches. There were 3,000 people in the first batch. Now there were less than 600 people standing in front of him at a rough glance. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, reached out, and took the military flag from Li Zonghu's hand. The military flag was scarlet. But the stars on both sides of the military flag shone more brightly in the night sky. Li Tianlan stared at the military flag in his hand and was silent for a long time. Amidst the silence, less than 600 elites arranged themselves in formation in front of him. In the endless exhaustion, everyone revealed an almost fanatical arrogance and fighting spirit. Li Tianlan held the military flag and looked at the army in front of him, the army that belonged to him. He looked from the army to the distance and finally looked at Reki City. In the sight of hundreds of people, Li Tianlan held the military flag, pointed in the direction of Reki City, and said calmly, "Follow me." Chapter 455. It was about 50 kilometers from Rekvia Castle to Reki City. The truck of the Snowdance Corps was parked at the foot of the mountain. Li Tianlan and the others sat in the carriage modified like the headquarters. It was not until halfway through the journey that he finished listening to Li Zonghu's report and understood the whole process of the march. There was a straight line distance of nearly 800 kilometers from Im to Reki City. The 3,000 elites at the front of the Snowdance Corps marched at dawn. It took them 15 hours to cross the border between Ra State and Oga State and enter Wulan State. The war broke out. The 3,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps ran amok in Wulan State regardless of the consequences. In the end, they fought a miraculous war in the history of nearly 100 years of war. They were invincible and stained with blood all the way. In less than 5 hours, 3,000 people pierced through 3 large legions of Wulan State, including a joint legion, a heavy firepower legion, and an elite field legion in Wulan State. The price of creating this miracle was 3,000 elites. To be specific, after a total of 3,181 elites of the Snowdance Corps arrived in Reki City, there were only 537 people left. In this battle, more than 80% of them died in battle. Under the suppression of the artillery fire all over the sky, they defeated 60,000 enemies. Li Zonghu did not retreat. No one in the Snowdance Corps retreated. They marched forward bravely. The morale of the army was as strong as iron. This was the real invincible army in the world. As Dongxing Wudi once said in the Border Control Corps, this was a legion with no retreat and no last resort. Now these people came to the Snowdance Corps. In the land of Eastern Europe, there was still no retreat and no so-called last resort. Li Tianlan clenched his hands tightly subconsciously. He listened to Li Zonghu's report and did not speak for a long time. 2,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps. Their predecessors were all the Thunderbolt Battalion hidden in various armies of the Border Control Corps by Dongxing Wudi. The Thunderbolt Battalion was the most elite force in Jianghu State. Jianghu State was the most powerful country in the world. Therefore, the Thunderbolt Battalion could be said to be the most elite and powerful force in the world. At its peak, the Thunderbolt Battalion was no more than 20,000. Dongxing Wudi had hidden half of them. Now, in the Battle of Eastern Europe, more than 1/5 of them were lost in one day. The light in Li Tianlan's eyes gradually changed, and an indescribable emotion rose in his heart. It was an indescribable brutality and cruelty. He quietly stared at the big screen in the carriage. On the big screen was the picture of the streets of Reki City at this time. The entire city was incomparably silent. The streets and alleys were ablaze with flames and scattered wreckage. Corpses were silent and fresh blood flowed quietly. Li Tianlan looked at Reki City outside, and his eyes were extremely cold. Light footsteps could be heard. Dongxing Rushi, who had simply treated Li Tianlan's wound, walked over with light steps. She put a piece of candy in Li Tianlan's mouth and whispered, "This is for you." Li Tianlan froze for a moment. With the candy stuffed into his mouth, he suddenly felt a little confused. Everyone present was a little confused. "The toffee is sweet." Li Tianlan swallowed, coughed, and looked around. Lin Yuxian, who looked a little tired and pale, was sitting in the corner smoking. Seeing Li Tianlan's gaze, he threw a cigarette over. As soon as Li Tianlan stretched out his hand, a tender white hand suddenly reached out and took the cigarette. Li Tianlan glanced at Dongqing Rushi. Dongqing Rushi thought for a moment, put away the cigarette, and took out a piece of toffee. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched. He stood up and went straight to the silent and calm middle-aged general in the corner. "General, thank you very much. They defeated 60,000 enemies with 3,000 people. Such a miracle certainly showed that the Thunderbolt Battalion of the Border Control Corps was invincible in the world. But if there were not enough experts to support them, the result today would undoubtedly be more tragic." General of 9 Heavens, E. Li Wangsheng, Lieutenant General of 9 Regions. Lin Yuxian. Dongqing Rushi. Su Chu. And 2 groups of the most mysterious terracotta army in Jianghu state. Everything came together. Only then did they fight this war that was enough to stun everyone. He glanced at him, slowly shook his head, and said indifferently, "It's my duty." Li Tianlan nodded. The other party's attitude was not indifferent. Perhaps it was this kind of indifferent attitude that could be regarded as a real neutral attitude. He patted Li Wangsheng on the shoulder hard, slowly turned around, and said, "Speed up. Go to the office of the president." The truck convoy carrying the elites of Jianghu state suddenly roared and began to speed up. Li Tianlan stood steadily in front of the huge screen in the carriage, deep in thought. On the ordinary and unusual night of August 7th in Eastern Europe, under the focus of countless eyes, 2 things shook the whole dark world almost at the same time. The fall of the invincible realm. The fall of Wulan province. In one day, 3 invincible realm experts, Jiang Qinyan, Black Ghost, and Chaos, died. The Jiang family of South America, which suffered heavy losses, became the first superpower to completely withdraw from the chaos in Eastern Europe. The Snowdance Corps, from top to bottom, showed a sharpness that made most people shudder. 2 invincible realm experts died in Li Tianlan's hands. Li Tianlan was just 22 years old this year and had not yet entered the invincible realm. The Snowdance Corps led by him completed the feat of running hundreds of kilometers in one day and defeating 60,000 people from Wulan State, Ross State, and Oga State with 3,000 people. After this battle, the future of Ross State and Oga State, which were already weak, was even more uncertain. In Wulan State, which was said to be a vast and resourceful country in Eastern Europe, 2 of the 4 ace corps in the country were directly destroyed. In just a few hours, in the face of the elites of the Snowdance Corps, Wulan State almost used up its war potential for the next 10 years. It was not until then that Li Tianlan truly felt the general trend, which was powerful enough to sweep everything, roaring past him. In the general trend, he was no longer a powerless bystander. He had mastered enough power to be taken seriously, and he already had the qualification to try to lead the general trend. Li Tianlan's eyes changed from cruelty to calmness. His voice sounded in the carriage. "Inform Wulan State, Oga State, and Ross State. I'll give them 3 days." Li Tianlan said calmly, "Let their high-level military leaders personally escort the bodies of the victims of the Snowdance Corps to Reki City." His voice paused, with bloody coldness and majesty between the lines. 2,644 corpses. In 3 days, I'll destroy one of their towns for 1 person less. I'll destroy one of their cities for 1 less team. At this moment, Li Tianlan was extremely quiet, but his whole body was full of killing intent. Li Zhonghu grinned grimly and nodded. "Understood." Li Tianlan swallowed the milk candy in his mouth and said lightly, "Contact Qin Xingwan." Qin Xingwan was the deputy commander of the Snowdance Corps, but he had been out of this operation. Li Tianlan, who had absolute military power, was in Eastern Europe. If he wanted to turn Qin Xingwan into a decoration, it was only a matter of a word. Of course, Qin Xingwan's position was there. If he wanted to turn himself into a knife to stab into Li Tianlan's heart at the right time, it would not be too difficult. What Li Tianlan needed to do now was to stay away from this knife. The soldier next to the big screen sent a signal in silence. Qin Xingwan, who had been paying close attention to the situation of Wulan State in all day, quickly connected the communication. His face appeared on the screen. Although he was smiling, it looked a little far-fetched. Your Highness is really amazing in Reki City. In this battle, you have shown the prestige of Jianghu State and the Snowdance Corps. Qinghuan admires you very much. Qinghuan gave Li Tianlan a standard military salute. In the time it took to say one sentence, his expression had completely returned to normal. Li Tianlan didn't bother to look at his face. He smiled lightly and said, "It's all because the deputy commander is in the rear that I have less to worry about." Qinghuan smiled with a complicated meaning. Obviously, he didn't want to be polite with Li Tianlan, so he asked directly, "What can I do for you, Your Highness?" "Two things," Qinghuan said calmly. "First, Fireman and the two sword masters of Mount Shu went out of the city to meet the Snowdance Corps and enter Reki City. Fireman was seriously injured and now has to go back to Im to recuperate. The old man is old. Please take good care of him, Deputy Commander." Qinghuan's face stiffened for a moment. He suddenly felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. After his thoughts froze for a moment, he nodded subconsciously. "Second, in the near future, I will continue to transfer some of the elites of the Snowdance Corps to Wulan State to control the situation. The number of people is about 10,000. I will sign the transfer order, and I will communicate with the Arctic Ocean Command in terms of armaments. As for Im, it is also very important. It was our first garrison base in Eastern Europe, and we can't afford to lose it. I believe in the ability of the Deputy Commander. During the days when I am not here, I will trouble you to take care of Im." Qinghuan finally understood what was wrong. Now that Li Tianlan had conquered Wulan State, all the interests of Jianghu State in Eastern Europe would be transferred to Wulan State. There were large amounts of interests and opportunities there. More than just the military would move there. The businesses of countless wealthy families in Jianghu State, even the grey businesses, would try to get a piece of the pie. That was undoubtedly a feast. And this feast had nothing to do with Qinghuan. Li Tianlan transferred 10,000 people of the Snowdance Corps again. In addition to the 5,000 taken by Li Zhonghu, Li Tianlan almost took away all his confidants. As for the 5,000 people left in Im, they were all Qinghuan's subordinates. With a few simple words, Li Tianlan directly left him in Im. "No," Qinghuan suddenly said. His voice was very loud, and he seemed to be excited for a moment. Li Tianlan laughed. "Your Highness, I think I should go to Reki City now. The situation there is complicated. Maybe I can help deal with it a little." "No need." Li Tianlan calmly interrupted Qinghuan's words. "If the deputy commander stays in Im, it will be the greatest help to me." The superficial meaning of this was very simple. The internal meaning was even more simple. Qinghuan's face changed. He gritted his teeth and continued, "Your Highness, I have to go to Reki City. I have something important to report to His Majesty the Sword Emperor." "Something important? I can pass it on for you." Li Tianlan did not give in. "It's about Beihai, Deputy Commander." Li Tianlan's eyes turned cold. "Remember your identity. You are now the Deputy Commander of the Snowdance Corps, not a high-level member of the Beihai Corps. Beihai Province has a strong foundation. What do you need to worry about? What you need to do most now is to hold on to Im. As for your private affairs, I will find a chance to communicate with the Sword Emperor. You just need to wait for the news." Qinghuan trembled slightly, and he was so angry that he laughed. He looked at the indifferent but young face on the screen and couldn't help retorting, "I don't think my business is a private matter, Your Highness. Whether you agree or not, I must go to Reki City. You have the right to choose." Li Tianlan nodded. "Stay in Im. This is an order. You can choose to obey the order, and everyone will live in peace. You can also choose to disobey the military order, and I will enforce the military law." Before Li Tianlan hung up the communication, he said coldly, "Deputy Commander, take care." Chapter 456. Qinghuan still had a choice. But from the first second Li Tianlan stepped into Reki City, the entire Wulan state had no choice. What was even more tragic was that many of the high-level personnel who were given great hope by the people of Wulan state did not realize this. The high-level meeting of Wulan state from morning to evening was coming to an end. The quarrel was also nearing its climax. News from the outside world would be transmitted to the conference room every few minutes. Li Tianlan was still 20 kilometers away from the office of the president. The conference room was in a mess and noisy. Rational politicians had begun to analyze the future situation of Wulan state after admitting defeat to Zhongzhou state. The hot-tempered soldiers were still clamoring for a fight. President Carlos of Wulan state sat quietly in his seat and watched coldly. The politicians who advocated peace were led by Prime Minister Riker of Wulan state. The hardliners who advocated war were General Zhou of Wulan state. When Wulan state was calm, both President Carlos and Prime Minister Riker liked General Zhou very much. General Zhou was nearly 60 years old this year. He was valiant, upright, and strict in managing the army. He held a high position but was simple and incorruptible. He could be said to be a model of the entire military of Wulan state, or an anomaly. Many people in Wulan state didn't like General Zhou, but they all respected him. When the shadow of Rekvia shrouded Wulan state wanted to do something from the standpoint of the country. General Zhou was the best bargaining chip that Wulan state used to resist the pressure of Rekvia. Therefore, even in the field of military defense, General Zhou was the best candidate to balance General Tostel Rekvia. Both the president and the prime minister relied on the general very much. But at this moment, Prime Minister Riker felt that although General Zhou was brave, he was not wise enough. The battle reports from the front line kept coming, which had already shocked the entire dark world. Wulan state had a large territory in Europe, but it was not a powerful country. Its military power was limited. Now, more than half of its elite troops had been defeated by the other party in one day. Advocate war? This was indeed a good idea. But how to fight? Prime Minister Riker looked up at the old general in his sight. The general stood there and expressed his views passionately. The Prime Minister's eyes gradually became cold. He suddenly knocked on the table heavily, and his tone was obviously impatient and irritated. Enough, General. The entire venue suddenly fell silent for a moment. The Prime Minister took a deep breath, suppressed the emotions in his heart, and said in an indifferent tone, "Everyone understands your passion. But please also understand what reality is. The current situation is that the enemy's 3,000 troops have completely broken up the 3 elite legions that our Wulan state has spent a lot of money to cultivate. You may be right. After the war, the enemy has suffered a lot of losses and is very tired. Li Tianlan may have been seriously injured. Now that we mobilize the limited army in Reki City, we may still be qualified to fight with them. We may even win." The Prime Minister's tone became more and more serious. "But can you make Li Tianlan stay? Kill him? Who could do it? And you seem to have forgotten that Wang Tianzong has now appeared in Reki City." General Zhou's aura instantly weakened. But immediately after, his aura rose once again. Intentionally or unintentionally, he ignored the topic about Wang Tianzong and directly retorted, "We may not be able to keep Li Tianlan, but so what? As long as we repel them tonight, we can win." Prime Minister Riker was so angry that he laughed. He lit a cigar, took a deep breath, and said expressionlessly, "Tell me your reason." "Li Tianlan is seriously injured. As long as we repel them tonight, it will definitely take time for them to fight back. What Wulan state needs now is time. Mr. Prime Minister, we still have a very powerful force. We are the largest country in Europe except for Snow Country, and we have a lot of troops. In the past 10 years, we have nearly 400,000 retired soldiers. As long as I have time, I can recruit more than 200,000 retired soldiers in the shortest time and reorganize several large legions. At that time, victory will definitely belong to Wulan state." General Zhou's voice was loud and firm. "More than 200,000 retired soldiers. 200,000 troops had exceeded the total number of soldiers in the military of Wulan state at present. Many high-level officials who were in favor of war seemed to be persuaded and were talking about it. The Prime Minister looked at him silently as if he were looking at an idiot. All the high-level officials who were in favor of peace also looked at Joel as if they were looking at an idiot. Good idea. The Prime Minister was silent for a while, then nodded and said lightly, but what about armaments? General Joel was an anomaly at the upper level, but he had an unparalleled reputation at the grassroots level of the military. The Prime Minister believed that he could recruit more than 200,000 retired soldiers in the shortest time. But where were the armaments needed for such a large number of soldiers? Under normal circumstances, Wulan state was in a bad situation today, and some powerful countries in Western Europe would definitely help Wulan state in order to guard the door. But tonight, King Tong appeared here and was taken away by Wang Tianzong, which already showed the attitude of the Shadow Throne. The attitude of the Shadow Throne represented the attitude of Western Europe. So it was impossible for them to get arms from Western Europe. As for the Rekvia family, Rekvia was the focus of the battle between the Snowdance Corps and the Jiang family of South America. Now the Jiang family of South America had suffered a crushing defeat. As long as Rekvia did not die, they all knew how to fight, so it was difficult for Wulan state to get arms from Rekvia. The largest arms dealer in Europe could be said to be the Violet family of Snow Country. But at this point, both the Violet and Morton families remained silent about everything in Wulan state. The reason was very simple. In the case of Rekvia's subtle attitude, neither of the two families was willing to make the first move. Because there was still the Qin clan between the two families and Wulan state. So they did not have enough armaments to arm hundreds of thousands of troops. Even if they emptied Wulan state's inventory and barely equipped everyone with weapons, Wulan state did not have the courage to really fight a war with Zhongzhou state. Their declaration of war was nothing more than to create pressure on Zhongzhou state. Were they really going to fight? Not to mention the invincible army of the Snowdance Corps that shocked the world, the garrison of the Arctic Ocean Command alone was enough to crush Wulan state. Eastern Europe was in chaos. If Wulan state was really determined to fight to the death, it was obvious whether the major powers that were exerting pressure on Zhongzhou state with Wulan state today would attack Zhongzhou state or come to Eastern Europe to take advantage of it. However, the Prime Minister was sure that the reckless general in front of him did not understand this. So he just asked a simple and straightforward question that hit the nail on the head. How to get the armaments? Everyone in the pro-war faction was stunned for a moment. Except for General Joel. An obscure and subtle light flashed in the eyes of this upright general, who was praised as a living hero by the military of Wulan state, and he seemed to be hesitating. He suddenly opened his mouth and said, what if I can provide a batch of armaments that are enough to arm 50,000 people? Arm 50,000 people with armaments. This was not a small number for any country and force. The Prime Minister suddenly froze and looked at the general in front of him. At this moment, the old general in front of him suddenly became a little strange in his eyes. What specifications? The Prime Minister suddenly asked. The most advanced weapons and equipment from Zhongzhou State, Star State, and Germany, with sufficient bullets and firearms, including some heavy firepower. It will only take 3 days. Within 3 days, this batch of armaments will arrive in Wulan State. General Joel said calmly. At this moment, not only the Prime Minister, but even President Carlos, who had been watching coldly from the sidelines, could not help but be shocked. Take out the armaments for 50,000 people at a time. If there was no advance reservation, it would be a little hasty for any country and force. According to the specifications that Joel had mentioned, few countries in the world could take out a large number of the most advanced armaments. This was the case for all countries. The super forces that could do this were even rarer. The most important thing was the speed that Joel had mentioned. They would arrive in Wulan State within 3 days. This further narrowed the range of forces that could do this. In 3 days. What channel would they use to transport this batch of equipment? Just as the Prime Minister's heart thumped with excitement, President Carlos's bright eyes dimmed once again. He closed his eyes as if he was asleep. The Prime Minister was still thinking. But what was there to think about? In Eastern Europe, the four families all had the strength to take out this batch of armaments because they were the local tyrants in Eastern Europe. But Rekvia would not take them out. The Qin clan would not take them out. The Qin clan would even stop the Violet and Morton families. In Europe, Rothschild could also take them out. But they were cooperating with the Wang family of Beihai at this time. In this way, the transportation channels of armaments had been blocked. But since this batch of armaments could be sent over, it meant that the other party had channels through these blockades. Violet and Morton couldn't do it. To do this, the only way to send the armaments over was through the channels of Europe and Jianghu state. Who else could it be? Who else could it be? The Wang family of Beihai. Carlos opened his eyes and took a deep look at General Joel. The general's eyes were still full of belligerence. But in the eyes of the president, all this had changed. The president smiled self-deprecatingly. Upright and unyielding? A living hero? There were many comments. Behind the bright essence, wasn't he just a dog that was driven by people? Everyone was the same. Carlos suddenly felt a little bored. It was meaningless to sue for peace and to advocate war. Because suing for peace was destined to suffer humiliation. But the so-called advocacy of war was also a plea for peace. Because even if it was a war, it would eventually become a civil war in Jianghu state for control of Wulan state. In the end, General Joel was not opposed to suing for peace. What he and the Prime Minister were arguing about was whether to sue for peace with the Wang family of Beihai or the Li family. Carlos closed his eyes again. Your Excellency, where did so many armaments come from? The Prime Minister finally spoke in a serious tone. It doesn't matter. Joel looked at the Prime Minister stubbornly, and his eyes gradually became a little fanatical. Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, what matters is that we now have a chance to get rid of the nightmare of Rekvia. If we can beat back Li Tianlan tonight, we can. Who said that we are a nightmare? A voice suddenly rang out, directly interrupting York's words. All the people present, including President Carlos, froze, whether they were suing for peace or advocating war. This voice was very familiar to everyone. Because this voice also belonged to the high-level officials of Wulan state. Even among this group of high-level officials, only the owner of this voice could be regarded as a high-level official. The top defense general of Wulan state. General Tostel Rekvia. In the unhurried footsteps, Tostel's figure slowly appeared in everyone's sight. He was dressed in a neat suit, and his eyes were haggard, but his whole face was full of excitement and rosy. The word high-spirited was almost placed on Tostel's face. Everyone was a little strange to Tostel like this. It was not the high spirit on his face that was strange. It was his humility. He was very excited. But when he walked in, he bent slightly, stood at the door, and made a gesture of please. Everyone's heart sank. The sound of footsteps became clearer and clearer. Two figures walked into the conference room one after another. Tostel followed quietly, low-key and respectful. President Carlos, who was sitting in the main seat, opened his eyes again and looked at the young man walking in front. He was really young. Carlos's eyes were a little dazed. The black suit was obviously just changed, straight and neat. The young and even delicate face was a little pale, but his eyes were extremely calm. The silver bracelet was on his left hand, shining with sharpness. His body was straight. At first glance, Carlos could only see an almost invincible sharpness. The dark sword master and Tostel from Eastern Europe followed behind him, one on the left and the other on the right. Carlos watched quietly and looked into the young man's eyes for a moment. Introduce yourself. The young man's voice was calm and soft. He stood up straight and gave a symbolic salute to all the high-level officials of Wulan state. I'm Li Tianlan, the commander of the Snowdance Corps of Jianghu state. His voice resounded directly in the conference room through the synchronous translator. There was a commotion in the conference room, but then it became quiet. You should thank me. Li Tianlan said calmly, if it weren't for me, Wulan State might be different tonight. His expression was bland, and he said it very calmly. Everyone, I want to announce a piece of news. Tostel took half a step forward and said in a heavy tone, late this night, Rekvia's former partner, the Jiang family of South America, betrayed our cooperation treaty. Jiang Qinyan of the Jiang family of South America even tried to kill my brother, Patriarch Shenker. At the critical moment, it was His Highness Li Tianlan who saved my brother. But the Jiang family of South America has a deep foundation. Although His Highness escorted my brother to Rekvia's castle, the crazy Jiang family of South America directly turned the castle into ruins. His Highness was seriously injured in the process of covering our departure. Unfortunately, my brother was attacked and killed by the masters of the Jiang family of South America in the process of retreat. This is very regrettable news, but fortunately, Rekvia and Wulan State are still there. Although we have suffered a great disaster, I believe that with the help of the Snowdance Corps, we will soon be able to, shit. A fiery voice suddenly interrupted Tostel's words. Joel, with a ferocious face, finally couldn't stand the other party's nonsense and stood up directly. He pointed at Li Tianlan fiercely and said angrily, it is clear that he attacked the Jiang family of South America and the Rekvia family, and even killed Shenker. Tostel, are you General Joel? Li Tianlan suddenly interrupted Joel's roar. Joel gave him a cold look. Li Tianlan waved his hand. Qin Shilai handed a file bag to Li Tianlan. I have some information here. Li Tianlan opened the file bag and threw the information inside on the conference table in front of him. These materials are enough to show General Joel's true position. Everyone, the hero in your heart is actually a traitor and a lackey raised by other forces. I have some remittance records between General Joel and some forces. It turns out that in the past 5 years, the general has received a total of nearly 600 million euros in overseas remittances. Every word he said in the conference room today carried the smell of wealth, but it was not the wealth of Wulan State. There was an uproar. Joel's face changed dramatically. He could refute. But the data Li Tianlan said was so accurate that it made him confused for a moment. You're talking nonsense. He raised his voice and roared again. His body trembled, and he pointed to the door with one hand. Get out, you invader. This is the last warning. I give you 5 minutes. If you still stay here, my army, can you still mobilize your army? Li Tianlan said calmly, there are about 31 officers bought by you with money. 3 of them are generals, and the rest are all colonels. Like you, they betrayed Wulan State. For the sake of the overall situation, I helped Wulan State deal with all these people. 2 people came to Joel's mind in an instant. Sai City. Cool breeze. Drifting cloud. His eyes suddenly went black, and for a moment, the world was spinning. Li Tianlan reached out and pulled in the air. The space suddenly shook. Joel's body directly hit him, and Li Tianlan grabbed him by the neck. Traitors should be killed. Li Tianlan's tone was calm. Joel's eyes became extremely frightened in an instant. Let go, I'm Bei, bang. Li Tianlan waved his hand and smashed it down hard. Blood spurted out directly. Joel's whole body was smashed into the ground, and his bones were smashed. Li Tianlan couldn't let him say the words, Wang family of Beihai, so he kicked Joel's body away and said expressionlessly, you're a lackey of the Jiang family of South America. Why should I let go? Everyone looked at Li Tianlan. They were thoughtful. Everyone heard the last word of Joel. Bei. Bei what? Li Tianlan glanced around with an indifferent expression and suddenly said, when my army helped Wulan State to quell the war, who gave the order to stop my army? There was silence in the conference room. More than 2,000 elite soldiers of mine died in Wulan State. Who gave such an order? Li Tianlan's voice became quieter. Still, no one spoke. Bang! In the dull sound, a high-level official of Wulan State, who was closest to Li Tianlan, suddenly burst into a piece of flesh and blood. Blood and minced meat flew in the conference room, fell on the desk, and sprinkled on several high-level officials closest to him. Who? Li Tianlan asked softly. Your Highness, please calm down. President Carlos, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly spoke. He stood up and bowed deeply to Li Tianlan. The Prime Minister hesitated, stood up, and said with his head lowered, Your Highness, please calm down. Everyone stood up. Your Highness, please calm down. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched, and he walked directly to President Carlos. Perhaps it was the fear of death, or perhaps it was because he was too old. The president subconsciously returned to his position and looked up at Li Tianlan's expressionless young face. Li Tianlan looked at him for a while, then suddenly reached out and knocked on the table in front of him. He said lightly, Get out of the way. This is not your position. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.